Chapter 983. The fourth wave of the Avatar crisis was coming. Soren could feel the increasingly strong death aura in the material plane because of the war. The appearance of the winter ghosts was just a sign. As the protagonists of the fourth wave of the Avatar crisis, the powerful demigod liches and the undead kings were still hiding in the dark. The gods had ruled the multiverse for countless years, and the pressure of this long time could not be dissipated by a single Avatar crisis. They still feared the gods from the bottom of their hearts, so they did not dare to act rashly. When the death energy in the material plane reached a certain level, or when they believed that the gods had become very weak, it was the time for the demigod lich and the undead lords to stand on the stage. And this process would take a little time, because there was still a very important catastrophe ritual. They needed to wake up the sleeping undead and bring more death to the material plane. This was a huge ritual to change the characteristics of the plane. It would inject a trace of the power of death into the material plane and temporarily suppress the divine power of the King of the Dead, Kalemver, so that the dead would not be able to rest in peace. In the end, they would be revived as wandering undead. Motor City. Soren stood on the tower and looked down at the whole earth. The impact of the undead disaster had shown a trace, and at this moment, even he was a little uneasy in his heart. Because a big event would happen during this time. A big event that would affect the entire death divine system. That was, the King of the Dead, Klemvox was attacked by the demigod liches and the undead kings. Soren did not know where this battle happened, because the King of the Dead Klemvox had not shown up so far. On the eve of the outbreak of the undead, the main god of the death divine system was attacked by many kings from the negative energy plane and was seriously injured. This injury caused the long sleep domain that he mastered to fail and could no longer cover the material plane and the spiritual world, so that most of the dead could not rest in peace and directly turned into undead under the death aura. Klemvox had been working hard to let the dead sleep. The intensity of the outbreak of the undead disaster was directly related to him. The demigod liches would only show up after defeating him. Their goal was the priesthood of death. Moreover, there was another grim reaper behind this plot, and that was the incomparably evil Naruto. There was no way that so many demigod-level liches and undead lords would gather for no reason. Even if the demons were trying to instigate them, they would not act together. There must be a powerful Grim Reaper behind all of this. Although Soren did not have any evidence to confirm his suspicions, he believed that Naruto was the biggest suspect. The Avatar crisis was a special period. During this period, all the capable and ambitious evil gods were ready to make a move. The Spider Queen's web could be activated at any time, and the Lady of Night was also planning an unknown conspiracy. It was not surprising that Naruto wanted Klemvox's priesthood. It was just that his actions were so secretive that even Soren could not get any information. Klemvox, the King of the Dead, had a special existence in the whole death god system because his doctrine was to let the dead sleep. This led him to stand on the opposite side of many powerful creatures who studied death. The most iconic ones were the demigod-level liches and the undead lords. In contrast to Klemvox, Naruto was a neutral evil god. He had no conflict with most of the demigod-level liches, and there were a lot of undead among his believers and priests. He was called the Terminator of Life. For most of the evil undead, this Grim Reaper's actions and doctrines were in line with their ideas. That was to end life. No impact of the Avatar crisis was born for no reason. The first few impacts were due to the greed and plundering of the souls of the material plane by the lower planes, and the later impacts were due to the long-standing hatred and contradictions between the main gods of the elemental planes. The giant web of the Queen of Spiders was due to thousands of years of hatred and ambition, and the conspiracy of the Lady of Night was due to the inseparable contradiction with the Lady of Silvermoon from the beginning. The outbreak of the undead disaster was also related to Klemvox, because the original three death gods were very evil, and he began to work hard to let the undead sleep. This kind of contradiction that had been accumulated for thousands of years was very terrible once it broke out. Soren did not dare to act rashly at the moment. He could only wait quietly for the mastermind behind the scenes to show up. Moreover, the main force of this impact could not be Soren. The god of light must have been investigating everything now. Demons, undead, devils. These three were undoubtedly the most hated existence of the god of light. Ghouls, skeleton soldiers, vampires, liches, mummies. It seemed that overnight, whether it was the southern countries, the northern highlands, Arendelle, or even the eastern countries, a large number of undead creatures began to appear suddenly. The traces of liches began to become more and more frequent. These liches that were originally hidden in the corners of the material plane appeared one after another. Among them there were liches and undead from other planes of negative energy. They sneaked into the material plane and caused countless disturbances. In the distant eastern countries, there were some very dangerous ancient mummies that ran out long before the appearance of the winter ghosts. This news was sent by the Eastern Princess. So far, the Eastern Princess still did not come to the city of Moder, but the dancer under her command sent a handwritten letter. It expressed humility and respect for Soren, and also described the recent difficulties faced by the eastern countries. The ancient evil creatures had just appeared not long ago, and they were not given a little time to breathe. In the remote desert of the eastern countries, a large number of mummies were awakened. These mummies appeared out of nowhere, and they gathered together under the control of the ancient mummies, constantly attacking and harassing the eastern countries. Many monasteries were now in a state of full preparation for war, and in the letter the Eastern Princess also said that as soon as she finished dealing with things here, she would immediately set off to visit Soren in person. Regarding this matter, Soren's attitude was more tolerant because recently the contracted girl, Cicada, who was given divinity by him, had also completed the training of a fist master. She was sent to the desert by the monastery to clean up these mummies that suddenly appeared. Maybe I should consider forming a group of monks. As a god, Soren needed to pay attention to a lot of things every day, but this would not affect his plan at all. He would soon be promoted to a great divine power. As a god with great divine power, there were many groups of monks in the churches of various gods. Soren's church was still relatively simple at present, and rogues accounted for too much of the population. He needed to inject more fresh blood and some talents with special abilities. The monks of the evil faction were one of the targets. Soren had been cultivating Cicada for some time. With a trace of divinity given by Soren, Cicada was now a legendary monk. What he was now considering was whether to take time to guide her and let the girl come forward to form a group of monks within the church for him. Monks were a very special profession. There were many talents in this profession, and because of the different paths they pursued, the relationship between monks and the secular world was relatively weak. This could make up for the shortcomings of Soren's church being too deeply involved with the secular world. In the middle of September 1677 of the New Moon era, Fallen which finally left the city of Moder and set off for the legendary Seal City. Soren could do nothing about all this because even if he was promoted to a great divine power, he could not easily enter the Seal City. However, on this day, a very strange thing happened in the city of Moder. It was probably in the morning. Suddenly, a very powerful energy fluctuation appeared in the city of Moder. This energy fluctuation covered the entire island of Moder, and then all the witches in the city of Moder felt that it was difficult to cast spells. Some witches whose profession level was too low suddenly lost all their ability to cast spells. Fortunately, this panic-inducing thing did not last long, and soon they regained the power to cast spells. Soren also noticed this at the first time. He almost instantly appeared in Gloria's laboratory, and then saw the elemental furnace in full operation, and Gloria, who was assisting in the experiment next to her. The preliminary test has been completed. Since obtaining the scepter of Savras, Gloria began to have a trace of divinity, less of a mortal's intimacy, and more of a divine spirit's detachment. She smiled at Soren, nodded and said, "Close the magic lock. Cancel the anti-magic enchantment." Thaling began to calculate the test results. That's right. The magic lock that had just shrouded the island of Moder was activated, and it was in a complete state, so it needed the elemental furnace to provide full energy. Soren was surprised and said, "The anti-magic enchantment was successful?" Gloria nodded gently and said, "At present, the preliminary test has been successful. When the magic lock is fully activated, the anti-magic enchantment can restrict the casting of all spells below the third circle. I also figured out some of the principles of the magic net after getting the information of the mage priesthood. But to complete the complete anti-magic enchantment, I'm afraid we still need to build a small magic net inside the magic lock." The anti-magic enchantment. One of the research directions of the city of Moder. After Soren seized the scepter of Savras, Gloria's research finally made a breakthrough. And according to this progress, the city of Moder may really be able to restrict the abilities of other spellcasters in the future. Only those who have the permission of the city of Moder can cast spells freely within the scope of the anti-magic enchantment. Chapter 984. Moder City Laboratory. In the second laboratory connected to the shadow plane, Alice was assembling the parts in front of her with a serious face. Soren's figure was also not far away, quietly watching Alice. Today's experiment had a lot to do with him because one of the items came from Soren. Assembly complete. On Alice's test bench, a huge boxing glove had been completed, and there were other parts next to it, but it was not assembled. She turned to Soren and bowed slightly, then put her palm into the boxing glove and said, "Start the test. Activate the mana power armor. Arm. Start charging." The lavender crystal tube was injected with mana, and then Alice's huge fist with a diameter of about 30 centimeters shook, and a faint light appeared on it. Alice first tried to move her fingers, then turned her wrist joint and recorded, "Flexibility is average. Equivalent to an ordinary human. Start the test of strength." After that, Alice walked to a heavy iron block in front of her, grabbed it with one hand and lifted it up and recorded, "Test weight is 1,000 kilograms. Done. Very easy. Increase the weight test." Alice turned to the second heavy object. This test was done 3 times in a row, and the final weight was 1,500 kilograms. Not far away, Soren had been quietly watching all this. What Alice was holding was the arm part of the power armor that he had obtained. It was not until the alchemy technology tree in Motor City was high enough that he took it out for research. The upper limit of strength that an ordinary human could get was 18 points. According to the records of the interstellar era in his previous life, the record of the Olympic men's weightlifting champion was 275 kilograms. This kind of strength was already 1 in 10,000, and it was probably between 18 and 19 points if it was switched to the data template. The repaired arm of the mana power armor provided about 25 points of strength, and the result of the current test was that it could lift 1,500 kilograms with one hand. If he started the test with both hands, the data should be improved a lot, but the improvement should not be too big because the ability of this kind of rune was constant. The flexibility test looks like it's only about 10 points of agility. Soren stared at Alice as she removed the power unit. He thought to himself, "It seems that the power unit is the same as the golem. It has a clear shortcoming in terms of agility." At this moment Alice had already walked over and said softly, "The test data is almost complete. If the entire set was equipped, the user's strength could be raised to the level of an iron golem. Even an ordinary person should be able to reach that level, but their resistances are too weak. Even if they're equipped with magic constructs, they won't be able to withstand the impact of battle. I think the Arcane Empire's runes should have an energy protection system." Soren nodded. "That should be the case. The power of the magic construct should be above that of the iron golem. There's an alchemical construct life form in the arcane tower. Can you use it to repair your runes?" After hearing this, Alice hesitated and said, "I can try. But there's no guarantee of success. The magic construct is more similar to a close-fitting armor enchantment. Some enchanted armor and gloves can also greatly increase the user's strength, but they're not as complete as the magic construct." Soren pondered for a moment and said, "I know. But the golem has a lot of limitations. Its intelligence level is far from being able to complete some tasks. The price of an advanced alchemical life form is too high, so the magic construct is a relatively cheap but flexible combat resource. Try to complete the assembly first and then add an energy shield." After that, Soren teleported out of the laboratory. The attack on the Divine Kingdom of Fear made Soren see one of the drawbacks of the golem army. It was that they were completely inflexible, and their reaction speed was too slow in actual combat. Unless there was a huge suppression of numbers, a more flexible troop class was needed to coordinate with the command. This made Soren think of the magic construct. Their users were determined to be ordinary soldiers. The cost was much more expensive than the steel golems, but not as good as the diamond golems. A complete magic construct could arm an ordinary soldier to the legendary level. For Soren the number was not too much. Only a small team was enough to make up for the shortcomings of the golems. A few days passed in the blink of an eye. Just as Soren was busy replenishing his forces, some changes began to happen near the city of Mordor. Quagmire Swamp. This was another small island near the island of Mordor. Because of the large increase in population, Mordor quickly established a town here. Mordor had a large number of clay golems as labor force, and they had a natural advantage in building towns. In just half a month, a port town was built. Now there were about 3,000 people here. However, the town of Quagmire Swamp was a bit restless today. With the rapid sound of the alarm, the civilians who were working outside the town quickly returned to the town. This kind of alarm would only ring when there was a serious danger. With the panicked expression of the civilians, a team of 100 town guards quickly came to the wooden wall and looked nervously at the cemetery not far away. Priest Philo. The man who looked like a guard nervously said to the priest next to him, "What should we do now? Should we ask for help from Mordor?" The priest on the side looked very serious and whispered, "We have sent a message to the temple. But it will take some time for the temple guards to arrive. Your task is to guard this place during this time." More than 1,000 meters away, dark green flames appeared on the cemetery. These were spirit flames, a kind of ghost with a challenge rating of about 5. As if some kind of filthy power had affected this place, there was a sound of the soil under the cemetery, and then a rotten hand stretched out from the ground, and then a decayed undead climbed out of the coffin. There were hundreds of undead near the cemetery. Some of them were dead humans and some of them were indigenous people who had been expelled and killed. 3 skeleton wolves that had been dead for a long time gathered together. Their eyes were burning with soul fire, full of resentment towards the living. It was almost evening now. Night was approaching and the number of undead that came back to life increased. In the end, most of the undead that came out were skeletons and there were already thousands of them. There were only about 100 guards in Quagmire Swamp Town. At this time when they saw the undead army gathering, they were obviously nervous, and the number was still increasing. Damn it! Why are there so many undead here suddenly? The gathered undead began to attack the town. They seemed to be affected by some kind of evil power, and their movements were even more agile than when they were alive. There were even some skeleton archers. In just a short while, the guards of Quagmire Swamp Town had already died. What made them feel even more uneasy was that their dead comrades were resurrected in a very short time and became terrifying ghouls. Oh. Philo's expression was extremely ugly as he muttered, "The dead shouldn't be resurrected so quickly, and they shouldn't be turned into ghouls. Only an undead plague can cause something like this to happen." As if to confirm his words, not long after the attack on the town walls began, the town began to panic, and screams of agony began to fill the air. Philo was certain that not a single undead had managed to sneak into the town, so he seemed to have sensed something. His expression was ashen as he rushed down from the walls. As expected, he saw a corrupted ghoul. An old man in his 50s had already become a vicious monster. Philo hefted his heavy hammer and charged forward. If he allowed the ghouls to attack freely, the entire town would become a playground for the undead. The priests of this world were not weak spellcasters. Most of them used warhammers, and they wore medium armor or heavy armor. Even though they were not as proficient in martial arts as warriors, they were still quite fierce in melee combat. Any priest was capable of both tanking and fighting. The filthy undead. The ghouls did not last long under Philo's attacks, especially after the priest cast a divine spell. However, the situation was getting worse little by little because more and more ghouls were appearing. 1, 2, 3. The dead civilians were quickly resurrected and became ghouls again. What was even more disturbing was that some professions had turned into even more terrifying ghouls after they died. These evil creatures would automatically add the Ghoul Touch ability to their attacks. Normal warriors would not be able to resist them at all. Philo had already foreseen that the town would not last long, but he still gritted his teeth and held on because his only hope was that the Mordor city would quickly respond and send reinforcements. It was as if his prayers had been answered. In the darkness of the night, a few agile shadows quickly approached from the shoreline. They rushed into the undead army and killed more than 10 enemies in the blink of an eye. A young girl wearing silver-white armor appeared. Pharaoh knew who she was. She was Annalyn from Amber City, a powerful Holy Spirit priest. Annalyn's appearance had changed greatly compared to before. At this moment, she frowned and looked at the rapidly corrupted ghouls in front of her. She muttered, "Undead plague? There must be a lich or a high-grade undead nearby. Send people out to find the source of the plague." After that, she rushed forward with her heavy flail. This was a long-planned attack. The plague had already seeped into the bodies of the town's residents. After the undead attacked, a large number of civilians quickly died and turned into ghouls. The priests began to cast divine spells to purify and dispel the disease. However, the outbreak of the plague was too sudden. More than 70% of the civilians were already showing signs of turning into zombies. They could only save about 20% of them. Chapter 985. This is outrageous. An angry roar sounded in the study. Soren stared at the followers in front of him with a pale face, and then a murderous voice sounded, "They are looking for death. Send someone to investigate immediately. Find these liches even if you have to dig 3 feet into the ground." Damn it. What Soren didn't expect was that these liches dared to target him when the city of Mordor was at its peak. The undead plague that appeared in Mudpool Town was obviously man-made, and it had been planned for a long time. The priests sent by the temple found traces of pollution on the food and water. It was obvious that someone had sneaked into Mudpool Town to prepare for all this. The city of Mordor was protected by Sauron's domain. Within the range of the magic lock, Sauron's divine power covered the entire island of Mordor. The enemy obviously couldn't find an opportunity on the island of Mordor, so they targeted Mudpool Town. Fortunately, the city of Mordor reacted in time. Otherwise, thousands of undead soldiers would have appeared in Mudpool Town overnight. These damned bastards dared to lay their hands on innocent civilians. According to the news from the temple, nearly 2,000 civilians in Mudpool Town had been turned into ghouls. Only a few hundred people had survived. This gave Sauron a great sense of crisis. Because Mudpool Town was right next to Mordor, there were enemies who could sneak in and spread the plague. If it was in other places, the consequences would be even more serious. Priests. I need more priests. Sauron frowned and looked in the direction of the temple. Although he had hundreds of thousands of followers, the number of priests was only about 200 or 300. These priests were scattered in the sphere of influence of Mordor. On average, there were only 2 or 3 priests in a town. 1 priest and 2 trainee priests. To fight against this evil power, the priests must be aware in advance. Sauron realized that he should expand the number of priests and improve the range of divine spells. He was about to become a great divine power, but the number of his priests was still maintained at the standard of a mid-level divine power. This was mainly because of the Avatar crisis. Sauron's divine power was accumulating at a very fast rate. He was accumulating 20 to 30 divine power points every day. Now that he had fewer enemies to face, he should focus on reducing his divine power points and increasing the number of priests under his command. Divine power was inversely proportional to the number of priests. The more priests there were, the more divine spells they could bestow upon Sauron. The fewer priests there were, the more divine power Sauron would be able to accumulate. However, if there weren't enough priests, he wouldn't be able to expand and maintain the faith of his believers. What Sauron needed to do now was to reduce the accumulation of divine power and temporarily increase the number of priests. Men. Sauron pondered for a moment and waved his hand. Order the temple to recruit a group of priests. Some priests from the Church of Shadows can also be accepted. In the near future, increase the number of priests in the church to more than 500. Under normal circumstances, a village of hundreds of people could only afford a trainee priest, and a town of thousands of people could afford a formal priest. This was the most efficient way to harvest. It could not only maintain the divine spells of the priests, but also allow Sauron to continuously accumulate the power of faith. But now he had to increase the number of priests because those who were infected with the zombie poison and the plague needed the help of priests. Sauron had to double the number of priests to ensure that there were at least 3 formal priests in each town. At the same time, Sauron thought about it and sent a letter to the Church of Agriculture. It wrote about the recent attacks on the city of Mordor and asked them to send people to the Wind Spear Hills. Now, more than 150,000 refugees had gathered in the Wind Spear Hills. These refugees had just settled down, and their living conditions were still very simple. If a lich suddenly spread the undead plague among them at this time, there would be an army of more than 100,000 undead overnight. Are these guys ready to do it? Sauron, who had calmed down, couldn't help but fall into deep thought. It was obvious that the undead disaster was breaking out. Just relying on the dead people was not enough for the undead lords to launch a conspiracy, so they began to spread the plague in the material plane, which could greatly increase the number of deaths and then rapidly expand the scale of the undead. At present, the population of the material plane had decreased by about 20%. Because of Sauron, the number of deaths had decreased by tens of millions. In particular, the prosperity of the southern and southern seas had attracted many refugees. According to the normal progress, many cities should have been destroyed like Amber City. A city of tens of thousands of people would end up with only a few thousand people left. In this case, if the liches launched an attack, they could turn a city into a paradise with more than 100,000 undead almost overnight. However, because of Sauron's influence, many places were still intact, especially the northern witches in Arendelle. Under normal historical progress, the fall of the goddess of magic would cause a large number of witches to die, and these dead witches would quickly be transformed into undead wizards in this wave of impact. In the original history, these dead witches had caused the fall of the northern lands in a single night. But now the rise of Sauron saved most of the witches. Although the number of resurrected undead was still large, it did not form a terrible sea of undead. So these guys brought forward the time of the plague? Soren frowned and put down the document in his hand. The fourth wave of impact was the largest casualty during the Avatar crisis. Because the purpose of the undead lords was to kill the living, this wave of impact caused more than 30% of the population to die. Although Soren had great power, he could only protect the city of Modor at present. As for other places on the road, it depended on the reaction of many gods, churches, and secular forces. My lord. A black shadow appeared outside the study and said in a deep voice, "There is a large-scale fever epidemic in the Amazon rainforest. It has caused thousands of deaths." As soon as his voice fell, another black shadow appeared outside the study and hurriedly said, "My lord. Signs of the plague have been found near Shipwreck Bay. The presiding priest of the temple has cleaned up the infected. But because the situation is serious, the port and roads are temporarily blocked." Tap tap tap. A tall witch with a beautiful face also appeared outside Gloria's laboratory at this time. She said with a serious expression, "Your Excellency Gloria, the Eye of the North sent news that there is a large-scale plague near the northern tower. They found the trace of a demigod lich and fought with it." The intelligence network of Motor City responded very quickly. Almost soon after the attack on Mudpool Town, news from all over the place was sent to Soren. Fever epidemic, plague, undead plague. This was indeed the work of the undead lords. Soren frowned and immediately ordered, "Send people to block the port immediately. From today on, all people who enter and leave must be strictly checked. Inform Port Tylon and Raging Sand Island to temporarily suspend overseas trade. All important trade will be carried out by airships." Soren was not afraid of these plagues, but as a god, there were times when he could not do anything. That was, if the plague spread on a large scale, even if he could save thousands of people, it would be impossible to save hundreds of thousands of infected people. These damn undead were obviously going all out. After the plague, it would be the awakening of the natural disaster. At that time, the awakened undead would reach a very terrifying scale. Come. Soren took out a command and said, "Immediately stop accepting refugees in the Windspear Hills. Some of those refugees must have been infected with the plague. Order the whole Windspear Hills to be blocked, and the 7th Fleet to Shipwreck Bay." One could imagine. The millions of refugees wandering around the south coast were probably going to suffer. But at this time, Soren could no longer ignore them. If he continued to accept these refugees, he was afraid that everything accumulated in the Windspear Hills would collapse in an instant. The living environment of refugees was the worst and most chaotic. And they were also the easiest place for the undead lords to attack. It could be imagined that almost all the cities that accepted refugees recently had some infected people. It only took 2 or 3 days. News from all over the world was constantly sent to Mordor. The first news to reach Mordor was from the Amazon rainforest. A terrible fever broke out in their territory. Even the strong Amazonian warriors could not be immune. In just a few days, the number of people who died in the Amazon rainforest because of the epidemic reached tens of thousands. Not even the Church of the Lord of Storms could do anything about it. That was because the priests of the Lord of Storms weren't good at healing, and all of the Lord of Storms priesthoods were destruction and combat. With the outbreak of the plague, the priests could do nothing but watch it spread. Finally, it was the Storm Lord who issued a cruel order. He sent the Storm Lord of the Temple to directly destroy the most infected town with more than 30,000 people. The army of the Temple directly flattened the town and killed all the infected people. At this time, Soren suddenly began to miss his enemy. Yes, Soren suddenly missed the goddess of plague and disease. If she was still alive with her clergy and divine power, she should be able to resolve this crisis. But she had died in the hands of Soren, and it was impossible for her to be resurrected. That's right. As if thinking of something, Soren looked up and murmured, "Corinne. She has the divine power of the goddess of plague. Fallen Witch." In the battle to kill the goddess of plague, Fallen Witch merged with part of the power of the clergy of plague. Maybe she had a way to resolve this crisis, but at this moment she was still in the Sigil City, and no one knew when she would return. Chapter 986. The city of Mordor fell into a state of alert. Anyone with unknown origins was strictly interrogated, and all ships and merchants entering and leaving the port were strictly restricted. Basically, under the orders of Soren, the city of Mordor gave up almost 70% of its trade. Soren was now basically planning to interrupt most of the trade to resist the last 2 waves of the Avatar crisis. And now Mordor had such strength under his accumulation. The wealth from Treasure Island made up for the consumption of Mordor's money. The minerals from the bottomless abyss made up for the consumption of Mordor's materials. At the same time, he also had some supplies from the Githyankis and the Fomites. There was no problem in maintaining the consumption of Mordor for a year or two. At present, the only food supply that limited the population of Mordor was now self-sufficient. Therefore, Sorin decided to implement a management plan of a comprehensive blockade of Mordor. Now Mordor was basically in a state of seclusion. While constantly receiving the population of the south coast, it also gave up trading with other forces. The signs of the undead disaster had become more and more serious. Several lurking necromancers had been found in the Inquisition of Mordor. What made Sorin obviously uneasy was that the wizards' organization specializing in necromancy seemed to have been recruited by the undead kings. What was even worse was that Sorin's church actually found a very small number of very special wizards from it. It was the Inquisition of the Shadow Church who found them, but because the other party was a wizard, Gloria also sent a witch to check it out. After seeing it, the witch was shocked and immediately told the news to Gloria. Then Gloria went to see it in person and was also surprised to send the news to Sorin. At this moment, Sorin had come to the Inquisition at the back of the temple. Then he saw a few very conspicuous big bald heads as well as rune tattoos on their necks, backs of their heads, chests and other parts. Red robe wizards. They were a group of people who were very easy to recognize because these people liked to wear red robes, all shaved heads, and had very obvious tattoos on their bodies. The organization of the Red Robe Wizards had existed in the material plane for thousands of years. They were one of the representatives of the evil wizards. They had once disappeared from the material plane, but no one expected them to appear in Mordor City at this moment. The Red Robe Sorcerers Association was a very evil sorcerer organization. Because of this, they were once brutally suppressed by the Arcane Empire. After that, the Red Robe Sorcerers disappeared in the Arcane Calamity. Even now, no trace of them could be found. Where did they come from? Sorin frowned as he looked at the red-robed wizards in front of him. Their bald heads were a little dazzling, so he asked the drow rogue who was in charge of the interrogation. There were only a few drows in Mordor, and most of them were in charge of special tasks. The one in front of him was an expert in torture in the Underdark. He knelt down on one knee and said to Sorin, "My lord, they said that they came from the lower planes, a large half-plane between the shadow plane and the spiritual realm, very close to the grey wilderness where the undead live." Other planes? As expected. The Red Robe Sorcerers Association did not disappear, but some of them escaped to other planes. Sorin glanced at the big bald heads in front of him and reached out to pick up the face of one of the female wizards. Inside the Red Robe Sorcerers Association, both men and women would shave their heads bald in the later stages, so that they could engrave runes on them. Sorin's eyes shone with the brilliance of divinity, and he directly used his magic to seize the other party's consciousness. Most of the time, women's will was weaker than men's and they were easier to control. "Tell me." Sorin's figure seemed to have a trace of magical power, full of endless temptation. He said in a deep voice, "When did you return to the material plane? How many of you are there? How big is your demi-plane? How many members are there in the Red Robe Sorcerers Association?" The expression of the red-robed witch became blank, and she seemed to have a trace of dementia. After hearing Sorin's words, she replied honestly, "We returned to the material plane half a month ago. We sent more than 30 people in this operation. Our plane is about the size of a southern kingdom. The Red Robe Sorcerers Association currently has more than 300 official wizards. A centipede dies but never falls down. Tori's Red Robe Sorcerers Association was once a great enemy of the material plane's peace. Their organization's origin was special because the Red Robe Sorcerers were separated from their homeland by a group of Mulhorandi sorcerers. They created a country ruled by sorcerers instead of god-kings. This was Mulhorandi's way of rule. Mulhorandi's divine system was similar to the Egyptian divine system. These sorcerers eventually formed the government structure of Tori, and they fought against their neighbors intermittently for several centuries. However, due to the disputes between the various factions of the organization, their plans were often disrupted. The origin of the Red Robe Sorcerers came from the gods of another world, and this divine system seemed to be gradually dying out like the other divine systems in the desert. Note, similar to the crocodile god and the goddess of wealth and death in the desert. The existence of the gods was not completely eternal. Especially when the gods of another world invaded other worlds, it was very likely that they would be attacked by the native gods, and it could lead to the other divine systems joining forces. The number of seats in the Pantheon Temple represented the number of gods, and many of the empty seats were the ones that fell in the struggle between the divine systems. Soren seemed to have noticed something. He reached out and looked at the tattoo near the chest of the witch in front of him and said, "You're all necromancers?" The witch in front of him was already mentally controlled by Soren, and she said in a dull voice, "Yes. The Red Robe Sorcerers Association's strongest faction is the Necromancers, and 80% of the sorcerers are necromancers. The other factions have long been divided and died out in the past." As expected. No wonder the Red Robe Sorcerers were mixed up with the Undead Lords. There were some very famous and powerful liches in the Red Robe Sorcerers Association. It was obvious. The other factions in the Red Robe Sorcerers Association were almost wiped out in the past, and the only one that survived was the Necromancers. This faction had the most liches, and they had all kinds of ways to escape death. Soren was silent. After a while he said in a deep voice, "Who sent you?" The witch said in a dull voice, "The undying Oro. He promised us that after the plan was successful, he would give us a kingdom in the material plane, and restore the Red Robe Sorcerers Association's rule over the kingdom." The undying Oro? Soren's expression changed after hearing this, and his expression became very serious. This was a very powerful lich, and it could even be said that he was one of the strongest liches to date. He was also the mastermind behind the undead calamity, and the most terrifying undead lord. This was a lich that had existed since the Nesser era. He was also one of the sorcerers with the highest level. Oro used to live in the endless caverns under the Supreme Forest, and his goal was to hunt the noble races. He had already made a name for himself during the Nesser era, and began to study the mysteries of death. At that time, Oro was still an immortal mortal. But during the year of the broken magic net, another Nesser sorcerer, Karthus, tried to seize the power of the goddess of magic, which led to the collapse of the magic net and directly destroyed the Nesser era. The entire Nesser Empire lost its source of magic, and the ancient Nesser sorcerers died one after another. Oro's undead legion was directly destroyed, and the collapse of the magic net triggered a spell on his body. He didn't die because of it, but he was transformed into a terrifying lich. That's right. This was an ancient lich that had existed since the first goddess of magic. Oro, undying, demigod lich, level 15 mage, level 5 great mage, level 10 legend, level 5 Nesser arcanist. These were Oro's stats on the surface. He had a special legendary class that was still unknown to the outside world. As for his strength, it was even more impossible to know because over the long years, he had gathered countless undead army under his command, and there were also many liches working for him. This ancient Nesser remnant had always been trying to restore the empire. There were very few records about him, and it could only be confirmed that this terrifying lich had become one of the undead lords, and had always been hiding in the lower planes near the underworld. "Are you all ready to move out?" Soren frowned and waved his hand. "Leave this witch and get rid of the others." After saying that, Soren turned and left the temple. He looked up at the dark night sky and his sight seemed to cross the plain. He murmured, "The first undead lord has appeared. Then, the queen of the Githyankis and the Death-Eye tyrant should also appear soon, right?" The undead calamity wasn't just an attack planned by human liches. There were also traces of other undead behind this. It wasn't just the undead transformed by humans, but also the undead transformed by other races. Moreover, one of the masterminds was the Queen of the Githyankis, a terrifying existence with a challenge rating of 28 and above. Lich Queen of Velakis, the real queen who had ruled the Githyankis for thousands of years, and she was also the queen who had been in power for the longest time. This terrifying monster ruled the Githyankis with high pressure, and she absorbed the essence of the Githyankis who were level 11 and above. Then, in the middle of the Arcane Empire, she was defeated in the war between the Githyankis and the Great Arcanists. But the Lich Queen didn't really die. She had been hiding in a corner of the multiverse, waiting for the opportunity to regain everything. Note, this was a plain war that broke out in the middle of the Arcane Empire. In order to develop the resources of the astral world, the 7 floating cities of the Arcane Empire were teleported to the astral world and launched a war against the Lich Queen who ruled the Githyankis. Soren moved forward in silence. The accumulated power of the undead was very terrifying, and it wasn't much weaker than demons and devils. Without the suppression of the clergy of death, it was difficult to predict the later stage of the undead calamity. After all, there were no more 3 million paladins supporting the world. Chapter 987. The Wilderness. This place was close to the southern countries, and it was also a gathering place for refugees. Because there was relief from the tower city nearby, many refugees stayed here. However, at this moment this area had become hell on earth. Tens of thousands of corpses were exposed in the wilderness. After the outbreak of the plague, many towns and cities set up fortresses near the road checkpoints to prevent large numbers of refugees from approaching. Those cities that had been ravaged by the plague had a large number of people fleeing, which led to the emergence of more refugees. At present, the southern countries had sealed their borders, and many cities had entered a state of alert to prevent outsiders from entering. However, the spread of the plague was not only limited to the floating population. A large number of corpses led to the emergence of a terrible disease, and the plague was one of the most terrible of them. Although there was no Black Death in this world, similar diseases still existed. If the gods were still gods, they would definitely not let this plague spread. However, now that the gods had fallen into the mortal world and become saints, their means of organizing the plague had weakened a lot. The priests could not stop the spread of the plague at all. In a large town there were only a dozen or so priests in total. Even if they used all their divine spells in a day, they wouldn't be able to save many people. Compared to the millions of people infected with the plague in the material plane, the power of the priests was negligible, and the gods did not have enough divine power to support the priests. As the plague spread, an even worse situation appeared. Humans were the race with the most population in the material plane, and as the plague spread, especially when famine still existed, many human corpses became food for other species. The first to be infected were the goblins. Goblins were active in the wilderness and they were like cockroaches that could not be killed. Every year, a large number of them would be born, and these creatures could survive as long as there was grass. The infection of the goblins sped up the spread of the plague. The gnolls and ogres who used the goblins as food were also quickly affected by the plague. Then the plague in the south began to spread in all directions, and soon the elves on the periphery began to be infected. The second race that was seriously affected was the orcs. With the war in the western wilderness, the plague spread to the orcs. The barbaric civilization was not enough for the orcs to resist the spread of the plague on such a large scale. Soon the shaman priests could not stop the spread of the plague. The first to die were large numbers of livestock. The strong beastmen had strong resistance, so they did not fall quickly under the plague. However, after the orcs, who were half farmers and half livestock, were infected by the plague, tens of thousands of livestock died in a single night. In the short span of half a month, the survival of the orcs had been brutally challenged. Because the cattle and sheep that had died from the plague could no longer be eaten, the beastmen's food reserves could not support the consumption of the entire tribe. What was even more serious was that due to the large number of livestock deaths, the orcs would not be able to recover in the next few years. This meant that they would have to plunder from other races in order to satisfy the consumption of their race. The spread of the plague showed no signs of slowing down, and the halflings in the Sierra region soon became the targets of the plague. Even with the protection of the halfling gods, this fertile land was not immune. In just a few days, thousands of halflings were infected and died. The northern witches had sealed off the entire region. They were monitoring the many towns and rivers, searching for the source of the plague. The only place in the entire material plane that was less affected was Arendelle. Perhaps because of the cold climate of the Frost Kingdom, the scale of the outbreak of the plague in Arendelle was the smallest, and the casualties were even less than in the territory of Mordor. But something worse happened. The plague began to spread in Sauron's army. When the navy of Raging Sand Island was infected, the power of the plague spread so quickly that Sauron had to isolate these people and put them on Snake Island. The gods finally could not sit still. Both the gods of the good and evil factions temporarily stopped fighting and began to search for the source of the plague. The battle between the surface elves and the drows also temporarily stopped because the plague had spread to the Underdark, and the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, had to start dealing with these terrible plague. Sauron also made a change. He penetrated his divine power into the disease and poison domains. The power of these two domains came from the plundering of the goddess of disease. Sauron gave the divine spell of Cure the Plague as the core, which greatly strengthened the priest's ability to treat diseases. At the same time, the city of Mordor began to increase the number of doctors and treat these infected people with medicine. The population on the road began to decrease rapidly, and more towns became desolate, even faster than the previous war. With the large decrease in population, the power of death also became stronger. Even Sauron's divine power began to show obvious improvement because he was also in charge of the power of slaughter. The aura of death made the undead begin to increase gradually, and the number of ghouls was somewhat out of control. At the same time, with the surge of ghouls, a demon lord of the abyss, also became more and more powerful. His followers began to appear in the material plane and expanded at an amazing speed. These dark followers were the Church of Ghouls. They could not give others too much power and wealth, but they had a special ability. As long as they joined their church, they would not be injured by ghouls. This change also began to affect the abyss. On the third floor of the bottomless abyss, the attack plan of Jianghu, the king of gnolls, was unexpectedly affected. Because the king of ghouls, whose strength had skyrocketed, seemed to have the help of some external forces and was gradually breaking free from the control of the king of gnolls. It seemed that the undead kings were trying to win over this terrible abyss demon. The gnoll king's backyard was on fire, and he had to temporarily give up the expansion of the abyss and try to regain control of the king of ghouls. And on this day, a terrible evil force returned to the abyss. Orcus had returned. The undead king of the abyss. The demon lord who was in charge of the undead. One of the three giants of the abyss. The terrible Orcus had returned. Orcus was one of the three giants of the abyss. He fell into a deep sleep during the Arcane Empire. His deep sleep was an important reason for the rise of the Queen of Succubus. Because the older generation of demons gradually fell into silence, the Queen of Succubus rose rapidly. The King of Ghouls was his most important servant and the commander of his huge undead army. He once waged a war with Six-Fingered that involved many layers of the abyss, but was eventually forced to stop because of the rise of the Arcane Empire. At this time, on the 421st floor of the abyss, the territory of the King of Ghouls, the White Kingdom. Countless nether transformation ghouls were gathered together, and at the center of this kingdom was an enormous hall made of bones. The King of Ghouls, Dorison, commanded all the ghouls. Unlike other ghouls, his body was straight, not hunched like his kind all day long. His eyes shone with pale green light. He wore a luxurious robe and leather armor, wore a white bone crown, and held a spine-shaped staff called the Hungry Tooth Staff. There was a skull on the top of the staff to show respect to Orcus. In the past, for a very long time, there were a large number of gnolls in this kingdom. They were responsible for supervising the ghouls and driving them to work and fight. Now all the gnolls had become food for the ghouls, driven by endless hunger. This place was out of the control of the king of gnolls, Jianghu. A black bone portal appeared. With a terrible pressure, all the ghouls could not help but kneel on the ground. This time the aura from the king of undead spread with the evil and filthy power, and a terrible demon appeared. This demon-like creature was fat, about 3 times the height of an ordinary person. Huge spiral goat horns grew out of his goat head. His legs were covered in thick brown hair, and his hooves resembled those of a goat. Its huge and strong arms brandished an evil skull wand. 2 huge black bat-like wings extended from his back, and a long snake-like tail with a sharp barbed hook trailed behind him. He was Orcus, one of the most powerful demons in the abyss. He was also the king of all the undead in the abyss. Orcus had a huge undead army, and the enemies he killed would directly transform into soldiers and generals in his army. Great Undead King. The King of Ghouls welcomed the arrival of the Abyss King. He humbly lowered his head and said, "Your servant has been waiting for your return." A mighty army of undead appeared. Ghouls, skeleton soldiers, corpse demons, bound spirits, shadows, corpse witches, hags, liches, mummies, Boda corpses. Orcus's enormous undead army appeared behind the teleportation gate. They had already gathered in a magnificent hall made of bones. Obviously, his resurrection and awakening were related to the other undead kings in the underworld, and this undead disaster seemed to have been planned for a long time. Roar! The awakened Orcus seemed to be a little crazy. His pupils were full of chaos and killing intent, and his mind was not as clear as other demon lords. He was more like a demon controlled by the chaotic power of the abyss. He let out a terrible roar towards the sky. Along with this furious bellow, a force spread across the entire multiverse in an instant. The next moment, Material Plane, Motor City. Soren, who was far away in the sea, instantly appeared on the high platform of the arcane tower. He looked at the dark night sky and murmured, "Orcus is resurrected." The former king of the abyss was announcing his arrival. Not only Soren, who was far away in the sea, but all the gods in the material plane and even the senior demons of the Bator Inferno were also aware of the resurrection of a powerful demon. Chapter 988. Orcus had returned. This terrifying demon lord was a legend in itself. Orcus was once a mortal, and no one knew the details of his life as a mortal. They only knew that at that time he was already a fat man who was proficient in some spells. After his death, his soul came to the outer plane and became the lowest level of larva. He began his struggle in the abyss and eventually became one of the most powerful demons in the abyss. The abyss was a magical place. It was full of absolute chaos, but absolute chaos was full of possibilities. There could be order and many incredible existences. In this way, Orcus became a powerful demon lord, evolving from a small abyssal worm. But his experience was not only that. After his rise, he met a terrible enemy, the drow demigod, Clavan Sari. That was how Orcus' first death began. But that did not mean the end. After more than 1,000 years, Orcus returned. He was resurrected but lost most of his power. But Orcus finally rose again, and he also mastered the power of the last word. He died again in the process of looking for the staff of Orcus, but then he was resurrected by his servant. This was a very special demon lord because the number of times he died and resurrected was far more than other existences. It seemed that he was a creature that was difficult to eliminate from the root. Looking at the gods, devils, and demons, it was extremely rare to be resurrected after more than 1,000 years, and Orcus was one of the special cases. So when he announced his return to the multiverse, the gods were not too surprised, but they felt a headache. The undead kings were expanding their power. At the same time, these powerful undead kings were showing their trump cards to the gods, telling them that they were qualified to fight with the gods. The undead, Owo. The Lich Queen of the Githyanki. The undead king, Orcus. At present, Soren knew that there were already 3 undead kings who had the ability to fight with the gods. He did not know how many more terrifying existences were hidden among them. Eastern Desert. In this lifeless desert of death, a strange portal appeared. Then some liches wearing strange red robes came out, followed by some wizards who were still alive. The most obvious sign of them was a big bald head, and there were strange tattoos on their bodies. And in charge of these people were some terrible undead wearing rusty red robes. They had Naruto's emblem on their bodies, and the leader was a half-undead priest. Naruto was an absolute supporter of those who did evil for their own pleasure. In Naruto's cold world, everything was the same. For him, all living creatures were a great insult to him, the god of death. On the contrary, all the dying creatures were shining with green and black sparks of joy. He liked these sparks. Some people did not pray to Naruto devoutly, hoping to get the power of Naruto. Most of them were given death as a reward by Naruto. Naruto's church kept a large number of undead in captivity. As a god in charge of death, Naruto was a very terrible enemy. He could cast the hand of death 17 times a day. During the Avatar crisis, Naruto was one of the most difficult gods to kill. And as a powerful god of death, even during the Avatar crisis, Naruto could perceive any death in the material plane within a week. If he was in the form of a god, he could perceive any death in 17 weeks. In other words, the information this god of death had was very terrifying. Almost all the undead that greeted these wizards were legendary. They were scattered on the left and right sides of the portal. As the red-robed wizards in front of them separated, a presence full of evil appeared. It was a lich. Sazastin. The former ruler of Tori, the most powerful and the most terrible existence among the red-robed wizards. A terrible lich with a challenge rating of 31 and above. He looked like a skinny, pale-skinned human wearing a luxurious robe. He had dark eyes, a thin black beard and withered hands. Of course he could change his appearance with magic. Usually he liked to transform into a tall scholar, old but energetic, with a pair of shining black eyes and a hoarse voice that sounded like it was squeezed out from his throat. At this time, Sazastin's appearance was transformed. He did not look like a lich but more like an excessively old wizard. He bowed slightly to the priest in front of him and said in a hoarse voice, "Nice to meet you, Naruto's messenger." The half-undead priest nodded slightly and said in the same lifeless voice, "The operation is about to begin. We have found the trace of Clemvox. Now, what we have to do is to gather all the forces to kill him." Sazastin nodded gently. As one of the famous liches in the multiverse, he knew very well that if they did not kill Clemvox, their plan would be difficult to succeed. Death god Jurgil had retired from the stage of history. After secretly observing for a long time during the Avatar crisis, the undead kings finally found that death god Jurgil had no intention to intervene in the battle of the gods. And this also meant an important opportunity. In the case of Jurgil's inaction, they could seize more things. Naruto was one of the masterminds. But among the kings of the undead creatures, there were also many existences who were spying on more powerful forces. Darkness shrouded the material plane. The undead creatures seemed to have overshadowed the devil's brilliance. The devils active in the material plane gradually withdrew their breath. They seemed to have sensed that something was wrong and were unwilling to fight the undead creatures head-on at this time. This retreat meant that the souls were plundered by the undead. The resurrected souls began to appear near a large number of graveyards, and the death of millions of creatures directly led to the emergence of a large number of ghouls. The first wave of the disaster of the undead had not broken out yet. But Soren knew that all this was not far away, and the key to determining the intensity of the disaster of the undead was on one person. That was Clemvox, King of the Dead, Clemvox, the main god of the death divine system, and the most powerful god of death at present. No one knew where Clemvox was, because Clemvox had not shown any trace since the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. He was very cautious. Soren was looking for Clemvox, and the other gods were also looking for him. Because of the current situation in the material plane, only Clemvox's divine power could appease these undead and let the resurrected undead creatures rest in peace. The city of Mordor was operating at high speed. After the War of the Kingdom of God, Soren began to crazily plunder the resources of the Abyss, and at the same time, mass production of golem puppets. Now many places below the city of Mordor had been hollowed out. Golem factories were built, and then a large number of manpower was invested in the production of war machines. The outbreak of the disaster of the undead was a war of attrition. Because even the demons did not have the endless cannon fodder of the undead. If they could not kill the undead king who drove them, then many undead would be resurrected again and again. Time passed in silence. Everyone foresaw the terrible disaster coming, but the gods in the form of saints could not stop it because their power was weakened too much. What the gods could do now was to protect their believers and churches as much as possible, and give the wilderness to the wandering undead. At the same time, in the Underdark, the powerful Queen of Spiders also encountered trouble. Because a very terrible creature of the Beholder appeared. Death-Eye Tyrant. This kind of undead creature transformed from the Beholder began to appear in large numbers in the Underdark. It seemed that the undead kings were also plotting something here. The city of Mordor. Soren spent more and more time watching the stars at night because he found that the glory of the gods was getting dimmer and dimmer. So far, there was no action in the city of Mordor, and Soren was also restraining himself and waiting for something. Of course, he was not waiting for the appearance of Clemvox, but for the arrival of another god. The arrival of a god from another world. In the boundless multiverse, the gods were not limited to the material plane where he was now. There were other gods in other worlds, and only the Pantheon was the place where they could meet. However, during the disaster of the undead, there was still a god from another world, and Soren was now waiting for her arrival. Under the dim night sky, a meteor suddenly appeared in the sky, and Soren's figure stood up instantly and murmured, "She's finally here. The goddess of magic and death, Verges." Mid-level divine power, another god from the death god system. The goddess who was in charge of both magic and death came from another material world and once had some relationship with the second generation of the goddess of magic. The meteor streaked across the sky. Soon it disappeared from sight. No one knew where the god went, but Soren already knew of her arrival. There were many gods from another world in the multiverse. Even the gods of the material plane had invaded other worlds. The orc god system was one of the outsiders who had taken root here. At the same time, there were also the ancient Mohan god system and the gods from other worlds in the Pantheon who had visited here. The arrival of the goddess was a sign. Because shortly after her arrival, the disaster of the undead officially broke out. Soren silently looked at the dark night sky, as if something important was attracting him. After a long time he murmured, "Is it finally going to start? I hope the power of the God of Light can stop all this." This catastrophe was not something he could stop with his own strength. The God of Light, who was close to the greater divine power, was the protagonist of the next two shocks. Only he could destroy the conspiracy of many undead kings. Chapter 989. The power of the undead became stronger and stronger. In the distant glorious city, near the Wind Valley city, the Church of the God of Light also broke out in a war. After days of tracking, the paladins finally found the evil winter ghost, but the enemy had already resurrected a large number of undead. After paying a heavy price they finally defeated the undead, but when they killed the winter ghost they paid a heavy price. Even with the divine power of the God of Light, in order to kill this terrible enemy, one of the most powerful paladins in the Church of Light, the Hand of Silver, who had once met Soren, died. A legendary paladin with a profession level of more than 27 sacrificed his life in order to destroy the terrible Winter Ghost, which was a heavy blow to the Church of the God of Light. The Winter Ghost was dead. But all this was not worth celebrating because soon after killing this Winter Ghost, there were traces of being killed by the withering fire near the Wizard City. This meant that there was more than one Winter Ghost that entered the material plane. Someone had awakened them and sent these terrible creatures to the material plane. It was already mid-September. The outbreak of the undead disaster made the city of Mordor welcome some special visitors. In the temple, Soren's figure appeared on the throne. He nodded slightly to the three ladies in front of him and said softly, "Welcome, lady with fiery hair." The beautiful woman standing in front of Soren had long red hair that was breathtaking. Her beauty was difficult to describe in words. She was the kind of beauty that was between the gods and the mortal women. She was the goddess of love and beauty, Shuni, and also the goddess of love in the material plane. Soren had contact with this goddess before, but those were not formal contacts. This time, the other party's visit was obviously more formal because standing next to her were the important gods, the goddess of joy and the goddess of cat and dance. Soren had a brief contact with these three, and their arrival was obviously not just for sightseeing. "Nice to meet you, Lord Shadow." Although Soren belonged to the lawful evil faction and the goddess of love belonged to the chaotic good faction, Shuni's attitude towards Soren was still very friendly. This was not only because Soren had helped the goddess of joy and the goddess of cat and dance, but more importantly because Soren had killed an enemy that she hated very much. That was the goddess of pestilence and poison, Talona. Shuni's priesthood was beauty, love and passion. This goddess placed beauty in front of love because beauty was the key to triggering love. The goddess of poison was her enemy and the target of her hatred. Shu and I believed that the goddess of poison's existence was the reason why many beauties in the world were destroyed. Therefore, after Soren killed the goddess of poison, even though the two of them were on opposite sides and weren't on good terms with each other, her favorability towards Shu and I was still raised to friendly and above. Soren walked down from the throne with a smile, took Shuni's white hand, and then led her to sit side by side with him. In any case, Shu and I was a great god. Although her combat power was at the bottom of the great gods, she was more or less one of the main gods. It was just that the scale of her divine system was a little small. The goddess of love looked at Soren with a smile. Her eyes were a little flirtatious and full of a kind of subtle teasing. This goddess was a romantic figure among the gods. She was passionate and unrestrained, but also temperamental. She was a typical figure of the chaotic faction. She had a history of love with many gods, and in the mortal world she was also the god with the most romantic anecdotes. Soren smiled slightly, sat down side by side with Shu and I, and said softly, "I don't know why the fire-haired lady came to Mordor?" The fire-haired lady was another name for Shu and I. After talking about business, the goddess of love's expression suddenly became serious. She looked at Soren and said seriously, "The situation on the mainland is not very safe recently. I hope that some of my believers can come to Mordor for temporary refuge. Of course, I will also pay you a satisfactory reward." After that, the goddess of love raised her beautiful eyebrows, and her expression seemed to be a little flirtatious. As the most talked about god at present, the goddess of love naturally also inquired about Soren's background and knew a little about his temper, so it was not strange for him to talk directly to her. She had an important purpose for this trip. If the situation was not so bad, she did not want to ask other gods for help. Shelter? Soren was slightly stunned when he heard this, and then he understood the reason for the matter. The key to this was the goddess of love herself. Although she was a great divine power because of her priesthood, she was also one of the weakest among the great divine powers. Although the powerful divinity and divine personality could give her great divine power, her clergy had nothing to do with fighting, which led to her not being able to exert that kind of power. The most important thing was that the Church of the Goddess of Love was very strange. With Soren's understanding of the Church of the Goddess of Love, it was easy to understand the key to the Goddess of Love's request. Just how weird was her church? Although it could be understood with a few examples. First of all, many of the Goddess of Love's followers were hedonists, and the other gods thought that most of Shuni's followers were seen as frivolous and superficial people who loved vanity, but were not dangerous. Her church would hold a grand carnival every month, and most of the wealth was spent on pleasure. Moreover, because of her clergy, although the Church of the Goddess of Love was spread all over the world, the number of followers was extremely unbalanced. The number of female followers far exceeded the number of male followers. When there were fewer female followers, there would be more than a quarter, and when there were more female followers, there would be more than twice the number of male followers. Moreover, because of the clergy, the internal fighting power of the Church of the Goddess of Love was very low. A group of hedonists did not have much fighting power, and most of the devout followers were weak. The number of people in the church who could fight could be counted on one hand. Because of the clergy of beauty, the Church of the Goddess of Love especially liked to collect art. Shuni's priests were all aesthetes and hedonists, and they worked hard to find happiness and beauty in all things. The pursuit of art and enjoyment was their life. The clergy of Shuni's church would buy all the beautiful paintings, sculptures and handicrafts they found in order to fund the excellent artists. They were even willing to buy these works of art at a higher price than the market price, hoping to increase the production of beautiful handicrafts. They would keep repeating this behavior until the church could not afford it. In order to maintain their beauty, her priests spent a large amount of money on the pursuit of beautiful art and self-care. So even though her church was quite rich, it was easy to spend the budget. That's right. The Church of the Goddess of Love was so strange. Shuni's clergy was beauty, love and passion, and her domain was chaos, charm, kindness and protection. Her only fighting ability was charm. So Shuni's church basically inherited the characteristics of the Goddess of Love. In other words, there were a lot of good-looking people in her church, but except for charming the enemy, almost none of them could fight. Soren's church casually sent a high-level rogue out, and he could defeat several professionals of the same level in the Church of the Goddess of Love. The whole church was a typical appearance association. There were countless beautiful women and there were also a lot of handsome men. The worst was that they did not look good, but their charm was not bad. But the fighting power of these people could basically be expressed with a ha-ha. They were good-looking but useless. The whole Church of the Goddess of Love, including her divine system, was in such a situation. Whether it was Shuni herself, the goddess of joy, or the goddess of cat and dance, none of them could fight, and there were almost no believers in the church who could fight. That was why Shuni had been secretly helping the Lady of Silver Moon against the Lady of Night. Her own strength determined the status of the gods. The Goddess of Love had a wide range of believers. Her arrival today was obviously because the situation on the mainland had caused her church to be unable to protect the believers, and in order not to let the believers lose a large number of lives, she finally chose to extend an olive branch to Soren. The city of Mordor was a very safe place, relative to the entire material plane. Soren fell into deep thought. After a long time he said slowly, "That's not impossible. But if Mordor wants to accept these people, I also have some special requirements." Shuni immediately said, "What requirements?" Soren pondered for a moment and said, "I can only accept about 50,000 people, and they can only temporarily live in the territory of Mordor. In Mordor they must follow my rules, and they will be directly governed by the laws of Mordor. Then I need a temporary alliance agreement. We can talk about the specific content later." The Goddess of Love agreed without hesitation. Okay. 50,000 people were enough for her to transfer the devout believers near the south coast to Mordor. As long as they survived the Avatar crisis, these people could go back. Well? Soren nodded and said, "Then I'll talk about the alliance agreement in detail. And I also need some help from the Fire Lady." Although the believers of the Goddess of Love were some hedonists, these people also had a certain value to Soren. Because these people were all rich people. It was impossible for people without money to enjoy themselves. Although the Goddess of Love did not have the priesthood of wealth, the believers she attracted were all people who pursued beauty and hedonism. These people were almost all quite valuable. If these people came to Mordor, they would naturally have to spend money. Clothing, food, shelter, and transportation. Soren could not provide these for free. These people who liked to enjoy themselves would spend a lot of money in Mordor. While the Goddess of Love was visiting Soren, some other gods also began to secretly contact him. The arrival of the undead disaster finally made another powerful god a little restless. Since the god of light took over the priesthood of justice, there were not many powerful gods in the human god system who could fight. The arrival of the undead disaster made one of the most powerful gods finally stand up, and the powerful church that served him was also officially involved in the secular struggle. He was the god of war, Tampus. He was the most powerful one among the powerful gods, and his combat power was second only to the god of light in the human god system. As the Avatar crisis reached the end, the gods who could fight and those who could not began to polarize. P.S. I've been a little bit speechless recently. Don't worry, I'm writing slowly because I want to write a good ending. Chapter 990. This was Sigil City. It was the most special place in the multiverse. Here you could see angels and demons drinking together. Demons would also raise their glasses politely to each other. This place included most of the races in the multiverse. Sigil City was connected to almost every place in the multiverse. Therefore, any creature could enter Sigil City. Some came here on purpose, while others came by accident. Tuoyama came here by accident. He was an evil spirit from the lower planes. Because of the damned space, he came to Sigil City by accident. It had been more than 600 years since then. Over the past 600 years, Tuoyama had become very powerful. His demonic bloodline allowed him to live much longer than a mortal. Tuoyama was running his own forces in Sigil City. He had opened an inconspicuous tavern in the south of Sigil City. It was called Taste of Flame Tongue. This tavern was responsible for serving demons, and evil spirits in Sigil City. Some strong liquors were delicious for demons, but poison for other races. To survive in Sigil City, one had to follow the rules here. Otherwise, the Lady of Pain would not even need to do anything. The gods and the ascendants would teach them a lesson. Tuoyama had always followed the rules of Sigil City. As an evil spirit, he used the rules here to make a living. Now there were more outsiders in Sigil City. As the Lady of Pain opened up Sigil City's authority, traces of other creatures began to appear in the portals that had been closed for a long time. Some came here on purpose, while others came by accident. Astral wanderers were one of the most common visitors in Sigil City. In the past, many powerful beings who explored the astral world would temporarily stay in Sigil City. As long as they followed the rules of Sigil City, no one would make things difficult for them. Recently, there were many more demons and angels in Sigil City. It seemed that some portals had been opened. Creatures from the upper and lower planes appeared here. The number of humans was relatively low. However, Tuoyama saw a human today. A very special human. The moment he saw her, Tuoyama's heart was filled with greed. This was because he felt a trace of evil demonic aura from her. He knew where this aura came from. He had seen Sister Radiance before. He felt a similar aura from her. This human woman in front of him had the mark of the succubus queen. She was an exceptionally charming human female. She looked very suitable to be a succubus. It was obvious that this was her first time in the Sigil City, because no one who had been in the Sigil City would enter her tavern. Trum's tavern was only responsible for serving the evil creatures of the lower planes. Many of the drinks here were deadly poisons for humans. Only a newbie would make such a mistake and enter his tavern. The human woman in front of him was clearly stunned when she walked into the tavern. Her arrival attracted the gazes of many ferocious-looking creatures. Most of them were demons and evil spirits. Devils were not frequent customers of Trom's tavern. Welcome to my tavern. Ma'am. Turam noticed the greedy gazes of some of the demons, so he greeted them warmly. What do you want? He asked. I have a lot of drinks suitable for humans. At this point, he glared coldly at the devil beside him. He was the owner of this tavern, and secretly controlled some powerful fighters such as a Hezru who was close to becoming a high-grade Hezru. Just give me a normal glass of wine. The human woman in front of him looked calm. She seemed to be a witch, which made Turam hesitate for a moment. He secretly considered if he should attack the human in front of him. The Sigil City had its own rules. That is, as long as any conflict is not discovered and not brought to the table, then it is allowed. There were countless corpses in the trenches of the Sigil City, but there had never been an open war here, because the Lady of Pain had never allowed it. The Lady of Pain had never taken the initiative to manage the Sigil City. There were many organizations here that maintained order in the Sigil City, because if the Lady of Pain were to attack, the result would be terrible. As long as the battle was carried out cautiously, it could be tolerated. If it went out of control, the Lady of Pain would have a special punishment for the idiots who caught her attention. All creatures in the Sigil City, whether they were angels or demons, whether they were believers of the gods or emissaries from another world, were forced to follow the Lady of Pain's rules. No one could go against it, because those who went against it had already paid the price, and most of them had disappeared forever. This was obviously not a place where humans should stay. The human witch in front of him calmly drank a glass of wine, then hurriedly left. The moment the witch left, Turam saw a special staff. The greed in his eyes finally made him decide. He secretly called for someone behind him, then went out of the side door. There were many dark alleys in the Sigil City. These alleys were used to settle disputes. Because the Sigil City did not allow open war, no battle would easily break out on the streets. Every inch of the alleys here was stained with blood. Kill her. Although he considered the possibility that she was a believer of the Queen of Succubus, Turum was not afraid. This was the Sigil City, a place where even the Queen of Succubus could not interfere. The Queen of Succubus had always wanted to regain control of the Sigil Cities fallen out of favor. However, because this was the Sigil City, she could not do anything. A human with the sigil of the Queen of Succubus, and an invaluable staff. As a legendary demon, Turum felt that this was a very good prey. A newbie who had just entered the Sigil City. After the witch had been in the Sigil City for a while, it would be difficult for him to succeed so easily. Anyone who came to the Sigil City would quickly familiarize themselves with the rules here. Because those who could not familiarize themselves with the rules were all dead. The Hezru attacked very quickly, and as a cunning demon, Turum quietly approached and prepared to launch a sneak attack. He believed that in the narrow space of the alleys, his chances of success were very high, and the witch would not have time to cast a spell. But suddenly he found that the witch in front of him revealed a strange smile, and then he couldn't move. Everything seemed to have stopped. Time stop. Legendary spell. Despair shrouded Turum's heart. At this time he realized that he had provoked a terrifying existence. But he had no chance to regret because what he saw was his last scene. P.S. I recommend Reagan's new book, Beacon Emperor. An old author, you can read it if you like. Chapter 991. Mordor City Arcane Tower. Soren's figure came to the top of the astrology platform. Not far away, Gloria was kneeling in the center of the astrology platform. Her beautiful long hair spread out, and in front of her was a strange crystal ball. This scene was full of a strange beauty, and Soren couldn't help but feel a little impulsive, so he stepped forward and hugged Gloria, then whispered in her ear, "How is it?" Gloria felt a hand reaching into her chest along the wide witch robe, and a trace of blush appeared on her charming face, but she didn't stop it. Instead she whispered, "Mother just sent back the news. She's doing very well in the Sigil City. Moreover, she said that she has already controlled some forces in the Sigil City, so it's convenient for her to carry out the next step." Forces? It's only been a few days. The Fallen Witch has already controlled forces in the Sigil City so quickly? As if knowing Soren's doubts, Gloria told him what had happened. Then Soren learned that there was an unlucky demon who had the idea to take over the Fallen Witch, but this unlucky guy had already died. The Fallen Witch naturally took over his forces, a tavern in the Sigil City that was responsible for entertaining demons and demons. Although the Fallen Witch was a human, she had the Succubus Queen's emblem on her body. This succubus's breath helped her control the tavern. Now that the Fallen Witch had her own place in the Sigil City, she quickly gathered news of the Sigil City through various channels. What's the situation in the Sigil City? Although Soren knew a lot about the Sigil City, the gods themselves wouldn't enter the Sigil City, so he asked, "Was it affected by the catastrophe?" Gloria shook her head and said, "Mother said that the Sigil City is very peaceful. Any open war is not allowed, so any organization can only fight in the dark. Because it had been closed for a long time, there were almost no churches of other gods in Sigil City. Some of the priests of the gods had been disbanded. Currently, the two largest organizations in Imprint City are the Deities Association and the Ascendants. Other than that, there's also a special organization called God Slayer. Mother said that these people are closely related to the Arcane Empire. She is trying to get in touch with them." God Slayer? Soren was now comparable to the group of people who had ambushed the Queen of Spiders. He immediately said, "Tell her to be careful and pay attention to her safety. The High Priestess should be able to help with this matter. Currently, Milan is in charge of the temple. I am going to send the High Priestess to Imprint City to help her." The Saint Spirit Priestess Milan had already grown. Soren couldn't enter Sigil City, but the High Priest could. She herself came from the God Slayers. If the Fallen Witch wanted to contact them to obtain information about the Arcane Empire, the High Priest would definitely be able to help. Yes. Gloria nodded and continued, "Mother said that she hasn't met the Lady of Pain yet. The Lady of Pain's appearance in Sigil City is completely random, and the length of time she appears has no pattern. She also can't understand the existence of the Lady of Pain. She only knows that she has absolute authority in Sigil City." The Lady of Pain. let alone the fallen, which, perhaps even the gods couldn't understand the existence of the Lady of Pain. She was the oldest existence in the multiverse. She was also one of the most likely people Soren believed to be the greater divinity. Sigil City was connected to most places in the multiverse, and any god that entered this area would be suppressed by the Lady of Pain. Don't worry about the Lady of Pain for now. Soren shook his head and hugged Gloria into his arms. He then adjusted his position and reached out to lift her skirt. Then, under Gloria's coquettish gaze, he let her sit on his waist like a black lotus. His omnipotent hands moved a few times and all the restraints were removed. Along with a low moan, Soren reached out and patted Gloria's plump buttocks. Don't just stand there, move on your own. After saying that, he seemed to have fallen into deep thought. Gloria couldn't help but roll her eyes at him, but she still obediently moved her hips. After a while, Soren seemed to have recovered and said, "There are many secrets in Sigil City. Some of them are unknown even to the gods. This time your mother's mission is the core of the arcane empire, the Mies energy core. Oh right. Tell your mother to be careful of the soul suckers in the south of Sigil City. There's a very scary guy there." As if he thought of something, Soren's expression couldn't help but become serious. There were many secrets in Sigil City, and one of them was related to a very scary person. This guy should be the most powerful human in history, and currently he should be the most terrifying lich in the multiverse. However, he had nothing to do with the undead disaster this time, because the level of this terrible creature had surpassed the level of the Avatar crisis. He was called Elam. He was the greatest arcanist in the Thorium Age. He cultivated more than 3,000 arcanists in his life, and he contributed more than half of the power of the entire Thorium civilization because the original core of the floating city, the Mies energy core, was created by him. This guy was an unimaginable legend. From the Battle of the Orc's Gate to the fall of the first goddess of magic, traces of this guy appeared. Elam appeared and disappeared in history, and around the year 3185 of the Thorium Age, Elam's name appeared in the history books again. Because in this year he had completed his greatest spell, Elam's longevity. This spell allowed a great arcanist to live forever and never grow old. Later he foresaw the destruction of the Thorium Empire, and then Karsus used the legendary level 12 spell, Karsus's Incarnation, to directly destroy the entire Thorium Age. Since then this figure gradually disappeared in history. However, as a prophet, Soren knew that this legendary figure eventually became the Elder Mainbrain Lich of the Soul Suckers. A terrifying creature with a challenge rating of 68. There was a portal in Sigil City that was connected to the city of the Soul Suckers where he lived in seclusion. This terrible creature was the same as the 3 legendary dragon species, and even the gods wouldn't easily provoke it. As if he thought of something, Soren continued, "Oh right. Let Kalina send someone to check out the distorted nether zone in the south of Sigil City. Remember, don't let her go alone. You can't let her go alone, right? Use money and treasures to hire someone to explore it, and if there's anything unusual, let her send the news back." Gloria stopped, turned around and asked in confusion, "What's there?" Soren stroked her buttocks and whispered, "Nothing. It's just that a time dragon seems to have built a nest there. I don't know if it's still there." Sigil City was an area outside of the gods. Therefore, there were also many links to terrible creatures outside of the gods in this place. Soren must pay attention to this. A time dragon. As a knowledgeable legendary witch, Gloria naturally knew what a time dragon was. She nodded with a dignified expression and said, "I know. The Avatar crisis." Soren couldn't help but sigh. Because of the Avatar crisis, the strength of the gods had decreased too much. Although Soren seemed to be very powerful now, in fact, the power he could exert now was not even comparable to the incarnation of a real god. Because the power of the godhood was suppressed by the Avatar crisis, Soren's current challenge rating was about 35. If Soren was restored to the form of a god, his challenge rating would be added to the level of the godhood. Then Soren's challenge rating in his peak state was about 50. Not to mention whether a team of adventurers with a professional level of 50 could be assembled in the material plane. Even with the support of the Kingdom of God, it was almost impossible to defeat him. As if thinking of the past, Soren's expression relaxed a lot. He guided Gloria to twist her slender waist while taking advantage of the rare opportunity to relax his body and mind, and said, "If my current strength is converted into challenge rating, it should be at least 35, right? If I'm in the form of a true god, then I should be about level 50. It's equivalent to some of the gods and saints with great divine power. Gloria's current strength should also be a leader. If converted into challenge rating, it should be about level 24. Fallen Witch's strength may be a little weaker, so her challenge rating should be about level 21. If it's the High Priestess, then her challenge rating should be about level 24. If it's Vivian and Lillian, then Vivian should be about level 29, and Lillian should be about level 25. The Divine Priest Milan should be an elite, so her challenge rating should be about level 21. Saruman should also be about level 19. Haha. I can't believe that I've already cultivated a large group of boss-level characters unknowingly. What Soren just estimated was not the level of professions, but the challenge rating. In short, a team of fully armed adventurers had to reach this level to have a 50% chance of defeating one of them. If there were adventurers trying to kill Soren now, it would take at least 6 level 35 professions with legendary equipment and various divine artifacts to have less than a 50% chance of defeating him. The difficulty of killing him was even higher. Now, the number of boss-level bosses in the city of Mordor was more than the number of one hand. In terms of dungeons, the challenge rating for the port area was level 15 or above, the challenge rating for the outer city was level 18 or above, the challenge rating for the inner city was level 20 or above, and the challenge rating for the temple area was level 25 or above. As for the other Pterosaur areas, Saruman's laboratory, the library, the witch's laboratory, the arcane tower, and so on, almost none of them were below level 20. No wonder so many enemies who wanted to spy on the secrets of the city of Mordor failed. A day passed quietly. The next day, Soren received a very important message. The messenger came from the palace of Arendelle. She brought a message from the Princess Royal. The Princess Royal will hold the Ascension ceremony in this month. At the same time, Princess Anna will be officially crowned as queen. Chapter 992. Princess Royal had officially become a god. This was a very important thing for both Arendelle and Mordor City, because this meant that Mordor City was powerful again. The whole city of Mordor knew about Soren and Princess Anna, and there were even messages in the taverns that the great Lord of Shadows had conquered the sisters. Not only Princess Anna was Soren's intimate partner, but even the legendary Princess Royal had an affair with Soren. There was no way to explain this kind of thing because the more he explained, the more troublesome it would be, so he could only leave it aside. Princess Royal becoming a god was not a trivial matter. Even if the disaster of the undead broke out now, Soren had to spare time to prepare, and at the same time he had to send the news to other allies. In the study, Gloria's figure came out. Her expression was very calm. She came to Soren, handed a list to him on the desk and said softly, "This is the list of prepared gifts. 3,000 high-quality pearls, 300 top-quality black pearls, 1,000 pounds of gold, 9,000 pounds of silver, 100 rubies, 150 sapphires, 300 amethysts, 500 rolls of high-quality silk, 1,000 pieces of oriental porcelain, 50 diamonds, and 1 heart of deep blue diamond." A long list of gifts filled the list in front of him. Soren took a look at it and was stunned for a moment, then he looked up at Gloria in front of him. "We can't let people look down on Mordor City." Gloria gently lifted her long hair, and a smile appeared on her beautiful face. "Arendelle is the most important partner of Mordor City. In this case, I know what's important and I already have a lot, so I can't ask more from you. If you can, I don't mind you taking Princess Royal as well." Speaking of this, she seemed to smile naughtily. This was not a gift list to celebrate Princess Anna's registration. It looked more like a betrothal gift for Soren. A betrothal gift worth more than 5 million Kindler. Soren was silent when he heard this. He reached out and took Gloria into his arms and murmured, "I'm sorry." Gloria reached out and covered Soren's lips. After a while, she sighed faintly, "I don't want to be a burden to you. I want to be a woman who stands behind you and supports you. Today's situation in the material plane is very complicated. Mordor City needs the power of Arendelle, and Arendelle also needs the help of Mordor City. Even the emperors of the mortal world wouldn't only have one woman by their side, not to mention that you have to face more than mortals. You need Princess Royal's power. Not only now but in the future, you will also need a powerful ally like the eldest princess. Although I don't know what's going on, but I know how many challenges a new god has to face. Now, because of the Avatar crisis, the gods haven't done anything to you. But if the Avatar crisis is over without enough power and strong allies, they may launch a conspiracy against you at any time. Princess Anna is a good target. If you can, I don't mind you bringing Princess Royal to your side. Gloria was a very smart woman, but sometimes being too smart made people feel a little sorry for her. As the mistress of Mordor City, of course, she knew a lot of secrets. Naturally, she also knew the value of Arendelle and Princess Royal to Mordor City. Although Sorin became a mid-level god, he also faced a lot of enemies. The power of the three gods of death made Sorin have to face many powerful existences in the future. Even the death god system was a potential enemy he had to face. In this case, as a god with a weak foundation, Sorin needed a lot of allies and they must be strong enough. Although Vivienne was a mid-level god, the time she became a god was too short. Although the Maiden of Pain served Sorin, she was not strong enough, and she was not loyal to Sorin. Saruman was still not strong enough. If it involved the struggle between the gods, the only one who could help Sorin was the powerful Princess Royal. Gloria chose to be tolerant and give in at this moment. She was a very smart woman, because she knew that if she didn't choose so, Sorin would face a difficult situation. How to deal with Princess Royal and how to face Princess Anna. There was a short silence. Then Sorin hugged Gloria tightly in his arms. He was not a person who would drag his feet. At this time he could only promise, "You will always be the mistress of Mordor." As Gloria said, Princess Anna was a good partner. She was the successor of Arendelle, and she could not interfere with Mordor because the whole Frost Kingdom needed her to manage it. If Princess Royal became a god, she would be the strongest link between Sorin and Princess Royal. This relationship was enough to ensure that they would become the strongest allies in the future. Sorin was a new god and so was Princess Royal. "Go and get ready." Gloria raised her head and kissed Sorin gently on the lips and then said, "Although I can't guess what you want to do in the end. But I know that it must be the greatness above the gods. I don't want to be a burden to you. I just want to stand behind you and witness that moment with my own eyes." Everything in Mordor. Gloria saw everything that Sorin had done along the way. She could feel what Sorin was going to do, which was something that no god had ever tried. If it succeeded, the world would change because of it. There must be a lot of resistance. The gods were sometimes stubborn and conservative. The Avatar Crisis gave Sorin a chance, but with the end of the Avatar Crisis, the conflict would inevitably lead to a new confrontation. Sorin needed strong allies, and neither the goddess of agriculture nor the goddess of wealth were enough to be Sorin's real help. Princess Royal could do this. In the future, even in the face of a powerful god, Princess Royal would still be the strongest fighting force that could not be ignored. The fleet full of gifts set off. At the same time, there were also messengers from the City of Wealth, the Northern Tower, and the Harvest City. Princess Royal's investiture ceremony and Princess Anna's coronation ceremony had obviously become a big meeting for Sorin's allies. Even the messengers from the Eastern Kingdom had set off. After learning the news, the Eastern Princess immediately sent a team of messengers with rich gifts. She hoped to occupy a position in these alliances. Arendelle. With the arrival of autumn, the whole of Arendelle suddenly became lively. The fleet of Mordor City was docked in the port, and the airships were docked near the tower. Countless gifts were carried down one by one, which made people marvel at the wealth and generosity of Mordor City. The witch envoys from the Northern Tower followed closely behind. They brought the blessings and celebrations from the Eye of the North. The messenger of the Goddess of Wealth was also generous. This lady hoped to gain the friendship of Princess Royal, and trade with Arendelle could allow her to gain more divine power. The messengers of the Goddess of Agriculture were the last to arrive, even later than the messengers of the Eastern Princess, but they brought a special gift, an improved winter wheat that could be cultivated by Arendelle for 2 seasons. Princess Royal's investiture ceremony was very simple. At least it was much simpler than Sorin's and Eugene's, and the internal composition of her church was also very special. The Ice Witches were the main composition of the church. Unlike Sorin's clergy, Princess Royal's core clergy was ice, cold, and winter. This was the ancient clergy. In other words, Princess Royal's clergy had existed since the birth of all things and the beginning of the change of seasons. To some extent, Princess Royal's power was more special than Sorin's, because she was very close to the ancient gods. The power of winter, cold, and ice made her less dependent on the church and believers. Although she could not be compared with Mother Earth, Princess Royal had an innate advantage over other gods. The whole church of Princess Royal had less than 1,000 people, and the number of priests was even fewer. Most of them were ice witches. In the future, the number of priests would gradually increase, and the scale of believers would also expand, but the dependence of the church on the secular world would be reduced. To some extent, even if Princess Royal did not have a church, her strength could at least be maintained at the mid-level divine power. This was something that Soren could not compare with. A large part of Soren's power was still in other gods. Whether it was the king of the dead, Klemvox, or the god of murder, Sirik, they all had clergy and divine power that Soren needed. The goddess of agriculture seemed to be unusually enthusiastic about Princess Royal's apotheosis. She not only sent cold-resistant crops that could greatly increase the agricultural output in the north, but also sent her own voter. This could basically represent the second incarnation of a god. Obviously, the goddess of agriculture wanted to get something from Princess Royal, and according to Soren's guess, the goddess of agriculture seemed to be very interested in one of the clergy of the Four Seasons. The official apotheosis would take place 3 days later. After Princess Royal's apotheosis, Princess Anna would be crowned queen. 3 days passed quickly. With the arrival of Princess Royal's apotheosis ceremony, the temperature of the whole material plane seemed to have dropped a lot. A cold current swept across the whole world, and this cold air suddenly made all races feel the arrival of winter. Princess Royal's apotheosis ceremony was chosen at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, which meant that she did not belong to the evil camp, but was finally positioned as the neutral camp. Originally, Princess Royal's camp was the neutral camp, but because of the Avatar crisis, especially after she became the Queen of Arendelle, her camp gradually deviated. It was difficult for a king to guarantee pure kindness. Finally, Princess Royal deviated to the neutral camp when she was apotheosis. Of course, it was because of Sauron's influence. Princess Royal's final apotheosis was fixed on cold, ice, and winter. The apotheosis ceremony was very close to the ancient ceremony, and the prayers of believers were omitted, which meant that her need for faith and church was very low. It also meant that Princess Royal had finally decided on her own path. The incarnation of winter. P.S. Tomorrow's update will be brought forward to 8 o'clock in the morning. Chapter 993. Princess Royal's investiture ceremony was very special. Whether it was in Soren's or Eugene's investiture ceremony, the prayers were a very important part of the ceremony. However, in Princess Royal's investiture ceremony, this was completely covered up. This was because when the investiture ceremony began, snowflakes began to fall. There were no prayers echoing during Soren's investiture ceremony. The whole of Arendelle and Princess Royal's investiture ceremony were silent because of the sudden heavy snow. The weak prayers only echoed around the temple, and other than that, there was only the whistling of the north wind. This was Princess Royal's way of announcing her uniqueness to the gods, and also hinting to her believers that she did not need to pray as much as the other gods. Cold, snow and winter. These were the sources of her power. Princess Royal's starting point was much higher than Soren's, and it seemed that she had succeeded. The weak prayers were covered up by the snow. However, Princess Royal's investiture ceremony was still going on. Golden light shrouded the sky above Arendelle, and with the arrival of the snow, more and more divine power gathered. This power did not come from the prayers of the believers, nor did it come from the power of faith converted by the divine network. It was a pure elemental power made up of divine power. This is a power between the elemental gods and the human gods. Soren stood on the balcony of Arendelle Palace, and beside him was Princess Anna, who was dressed to the nines. The cute little princess who had not seen Soren for a long time, seemed a little angry, but she could not help but look at Soren's side profile from time to time. The power of the gods was very different. Soren's divinity was also compatible with the ancient gods, and that was slaughter, death and shadow. Any slaughter related to Soren could provide him with divine power, and death was a very important part. The shadow divine power originated from the shadow realm. This meant that even if Soren lost all his followers, as long as the shadow realm still existed in the multiverse, Soren's divine power could still be maintained at the level of a lesser divine power. This was the lower limit of divine power brought about by the ancient priesthood. Just like the great god of death, Jurgil, although he was tired of the priesthood of death, he could become a mid-level divine power or even a great divine power at any time if he wanted to. The lower limit of Princess Royal's divine power was higher than Soren's. With her current believers, churches and priests, it would be difficult for her to maintain the faith of a false god. But now, the power she showed in the investiture ceremony was intermediate divine power. Princess Royal opened another door for Soren. To a certain extent, the power that Princess Royal displayed at this moment originated from the elemental gods. In other words, it was the cold and snow that were outside of water, fire, and earth. This special power made Princess Royal an existence that didn't require faith, just like the elemental gods. Even if her church became very weak, Princess Royal could still maintain the power of a mid-level divine power, unless someone stole her priesthood. This success allowed Soren to discover a new mystery of the gods. It also meant that Princess Royal had officially become the embodiment of winter and ice. She had become a special existence between the elemental gods and the human gods. In the blink of an eye, the whole of Arendelle was covered in silver because of Princess Royal's investiture. At the same time as the ceremony was completed, the golden light of divinity gathered in the sky above the temple. A special and desolate divine kingdom was responding to Princess Royal's summons. That was the divine kingdom of ice. An ancient divine kingdom that had been silent for thousands of years was finally reawakened at this moment. At this moment, Soren even suspected that Princess Royal was the reincarnation of the goddess of ice. Just like the previous incarnation of the god of light was the sun god, many gods would come back through reincarnation after they fell. The cold wind gradually dissipated. However, the whole divine kingdom of ice was wrapped in a layer of white. The figure of Princess Royal appeared in the sky, followed by the golden figure representing Soren. Then a golden light appeared over the Temple of Wealth, followed by figures in the Temple of Agriculture and the Temple of Sea. The gods were celebrating her. Almost all the gods who had an alliance with Soren appeared to celebrate Princess Royal. Even in the far south, Eugene, who was in the sky above the orcs, also appeared to celebrate Princess Royal. In any case, Eugene was able to become a god with the help of Princess Royal's power. However, all this seemed to be just the beginning. Because just as Princess Royal's ceremony was officially completed, a little bit of special light appeared. Then a goddess with a smile appeared from the light. When the other gods saw her figure, they couldn't help but be stunned. Even Soren quickly bowed slightly to the goddess in front of him to express his respect for her. This goddess wasn't very powerful. She was just a mid-level god, but no one dared to ignore her existence because she was the goddess of luck, Tamora. Surprise. All the gods present were very surprised, because no one had thought that the goddess of luck would appear at the Princess Royal's apotheosis ceremony. I give you my blessing. The goddess of luck smiled and walked in front of Princess Royal, then put her palm on Princess Royal's head. At this moment, Princess Royal looked like a well-behaved daughter, quietly accepting the goddess of luck's blessing. The goddess didn't stay for long. She just appeared and gave Princess Royal her blessing, then quickly disappeared in front of everyone's eyes. But before everyone recovered from the surprise of the goddess of luck's appearance, suddenly the elemental power of the whole Arendelle became very strong, and then there was a huge wave at the port. The endless sea turned into the figure of a giant. He looked at Princess Royal above Arendelle, then nodded slightly. But it seemed that this was just the beginning. Then the wind suddenly appeared, and in the sky above Arendelle, an ethereal shadow of a goddess also appeared, and at the same time she nodded slightly to Princess Royal. The goddess of water elements, Istisha. The goddess of wind elements, Arcady. It seemed that the special nature of Princess Royal's ascension had even shocked these ancient elemental gods. 2 of the 4 elemental gods actually appeared. The appearance of the goddess of water elements should be related to the priesthood of ice and snow, and the appearance of the goddess of wind elements should be due to the north wind domain that Princess Royal mastered. There was a trace of inquiry in the eyes of these 2 gods, and their attitude was far less intimate than that of the goddess of luck. They just nodded to Princess Royal and disappeared. This meant that there was a weak connection between the priesthood of Princess Royal and them, but the relationship between them was not close. This situation was very common among the gods, just like how the wind elemental god had some dealings with Adelie Fenria, winged elven guardian goddess, and Sandaker, god of exploration and exploration, but their relationship was not close. Similarly, the goddess of water elements, the guardian of the sea elves, and the goddess of the sea also had contacts, but the relationship was also very ordinary. The arrival of the 2 elemental gods was more because of the special nature of Princess Royal's priesthood. At the same time, there was a little connection between the 2 sides, and they happened to be in the material plane, so they appeared to celebrate the official ascension of Princess Royal. It had to be said. Although the ascension of Princess Royal was not as big as that of Soren, the scene of the god celebration was more magnificent. There were 2 great divine powers and there were a lot of mid-level divine powers. As for the weak divine powers, there was only the Maiden of Pain who came with Soren. Such a luxurious lineup made it impossible for any god to underestimate the existence of Princess Royal. Although she was officially ascended today, no matter who wanted to do anything to her in the future, they would have to consider the weight of the gods present today. The golden light gradually converged. The figure of Princess Royal returned to the temple, and the other gods had already left. Soren was the only true god who stayed in Arendelle, because his relationship with Princess Royal was very close, far more than the other gods' relationship with her. The ascension ceremony was over. The seemingly simple ceremony announced the amazing background of Princess Royal, although to a large extent, this background was related to Soren. The Palace of Arendelle. As the figure of Princess Royal dissipated, Soren turned his head and looked at Princess Anna beside him. He hadn't seen the girl in front of him for a long time. She had become more and more beautiful. She was like an orchid gradually blooming, showing unparalleled beauty. But at the moment, Princess Anna's expression was not happy. Her small face was full of resentment. From time to time, she looked at Soren and snorted in a fit of anger. She looked a little haggard, and it seemed that she had been very tired recently. As a young girl, it was not easy for her to learn how to manage a kingdom. Anna. Soren took Princess Anna's white little hand. She struggled a little in a fit of anger, and then let Soren hold her hand. A slight blush appeared on her pretty face. At this moment, Soren's expression was very serious. He looked into Princess Anna's eyes and said in a deep voice, "Have you really thought it through?" Princess Anna was a little confused. She didn't understand why Soren didn't apologize to her after not seeing her for so long. Instead, he suddenly asked such a question with a righteous expression. But Soren's expression was too serious, so she was stunned by him. Thought what through? Doesn't this bastard know that I like him? Princess Anna's imagination ran wild, but at this time, Soren held her hands and said seriously, "Have you really thought it through? The Avatar crisis will be over in 2 years at most. At that time, I will return to the kingdom of God, and it will be almost impossible for me to return to the material plane. Even if I descend, I can only use my incarnation. You still have a long life. If you want, you can even immortality as a mortal. I can't be by your side all the time. And as a god, whether it is dignity or possessiveness, it determines that after you choose me, no other man can walk into your life. You will be accompanied by a long period of loneliness, and even if you choose to grow old as a mortal, you will have to face a choice, that is, to enter my kingdom of God, or to enter the Princess Royal's kingdom of God. All of this. Have you really thought it through?" Hearing Soren's words, Princess Anna suddenly froze in place. Then, many questions that had troubled her for a long time were answered. No wonder her sister had always opposed her and Soren, even after knowing that Soren had become a god. No wonder Soren had been avoiding her, because he had seen further than her, and she had never thought about those questions just now. Yes. Whether it was Princess Royal or Soren, they would return to the kingdom of God after the end of the Avatar crisis, and Princess Anna had to stay in the material plane at that time. Even if they could use their incarnations to descend, they could not accompany her for a long time. If she really chose Soren, then it was tantamount to choosing a long and lonely road. Soren could never be with her like a mortal husband. At most, he could only use his incarnation to descend once in a while. All of this was not easy for a girl. It was precisely because of this that Princess Royal hoped Princess Anna would choose a mortal. There was a short silence. Then Princess Anna raised her head and looked at Soren with great seriousness and said, "I do." Everything was frozen. Thousands of words were overshadowed by these 3 words. Even if she knew that she might be lonely in the future, she still said "I do" without hesitation. Soren did not speak again. He just sighed and hugged the girl in front of him tightly in his arms, no longer escaping. Princess Anna buried her head in Soren's arms, rolled her eyes, and then whispered in Soren's ear with a blush on her face, "If you really can't accompany me in the future, then give me a child. At least she will accompany me." After that, the girl shrank back like an ostrich and even her ears became crimson. P.S. Since writing, the time for exercise has gradually decreased, and Futu's weight has increased by more than 20 kilograms. His results are not as good as the great gods, but his weight is. It's really sad. Thinking about the news of the death of a certain writer, he was so scared that he peed his pants. So he decided to run to lose weight. He must not be fat, although he was now developing this trend. Coincidentally, there was a reader brother in Tsingtao who ran a WeChat store, specializing in authentic Nike running shoes produced by Tsingtao Taiguang. When he heard that Fu Tu wanted to lose weight, he mailed me 2 pairs of shoes. Fu Tu ran around in them for 3 days and he really slipped away. When I went to the store and asked, a pair was more than 800 yuan, and this brother only sold it for more than 400 yuan on WeChat. It was hard to refuse such kindness, so I could only promote this brother. If you need, search my WeChat number, V537547, Awakening Nike Sports Discount Store, mention my name and you will get a discount. Chapter 994. Arendelle Palace. This was a beautiful country wrapped in silver. Although it was only October and there was still some time before winter, because of Princess Royal's investiture, this year's winter had obviously started earlier. Shortly after Princess Royal's investiture, Princess Anna's coronation ceremony was also held as usual. Unlike the investiture ceremony of Princess Royal, Princess Anna's coronation ceremony was very grand. Not only Mordor City, Northern Tower, Harvest City, Falcon Kingdom, Southern Islands, etc., but even the Lord of Light, Lady of Silver Moon, and the God of War sent people to celebrate. The reason was simple. Princess Royal's investiture was one thing, but Princess Anna's coronation was another. Princess Anna's coronation was part of the secular world. Especially after Princess Royal made it clear that she did not need much faith from mortals at the investiture ceremony, the other gods were immediately moved. Arendelle was the center of the Frost Kingdom. This land occupied the entire northern region of the continent and had a very vast land and population. Because of the protection of Princess Royal, even after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, the population of the entire Frost Kingdom was still about 10 million. This was a considerable number. Even if the gods were to share it, they would still be able to win a lot of believers. The system of the Frost Kingdom was the enfeoffment of royalty. Princess Anna directly led more than 5 million people around the kingdom of Arendelle. The other residents of the north were ruled by the lords of Glacier City, Winter Spring, North Sea City, and so on. Almost every one of them had legendary strength and above. They had come to Arendelle today and would swear allegiance to Queen Anna at the coronation ceremony. Arendelle was the second largest city in the material plane. At present, the largest city in the material plane was undoubtedly Mordor City, which now had a population of more than 400,000. The population of Arendelle was slightly smaller. The population in the royal city was about 120,000. Because of the inherent advantage of sea transportation, the population around the city was still about 70,000 to 80,000. Unlike other cities, because of the management of Mordor City and the Ice Witch's use of magic in their lives, even after the population of Arendelle exceeded 100,000, the whole city was not dirty and messy. However, the layout of Arendelle City was still flawed. The city could only accommodate about 200,000 people at most. Any more and the city would become bloated and dirty. Soren had been living in the royal palace all this time. As for Princess Royal, it seemed that she no longer objected to him being close to Princess Anna. She acquiesced to everything that had happened. On the day of the coronation, tens of thousands of people gathered in the square and near the palace. As an ancient family that had ruled Arendelle for hundreds of years, both Princess Royal and Princess Anna were loved by the people. Teams of guards in brand new armor guarded the palace, and patrols maintained the order of the entire square. Both sides of the road were almost jammed. Today, Princess Anna would drive the dragon carriage around Arendelle so that all the people could see their queen. The last part of the ceremony was held in the palace. When the coronation ceremony was completed, many northern lords would swear allegiance to her. The orderly guards had already gone out. This was a glorious moment for Princess Anna. Soren personally sent her to the dragon carriage and then watched her leave the palace. "My lord." A dark figure appeared beside Soren and knelt down on one knee. "Believers of Lady Night have been found near the South City. There are 3 lurking devils at the North Port. There are spies from the Southern Island in the East City. At present they have all been targeted. My lord, what should we do with these people?" Princess Anna's coronation ceremony was so grand that it was almost impossible for no one to have evil intentions. Soren's expression was very cold and he slowly said, "Deal with them all secretly. Don't alarm too many people and don't affect the ceremony." Just like before, Soren's believers had been secretly protecting Princess Anna and getting rid of those who had evil intentions for her. Although the elder princess had great power, whether it was the Ice Witches or the Temple Church, it was impossible to have so many rogues under Soren's command. Any conspiracy could not be hidden in front of him, and today Soren's murderous intent was undoubtedly heavier. Understood. The dark figure disappeared. At the same time, more than 5 teams of top rogues inside Arendelle could also act. Almost all of them were first-class assassins, proficient in all kinds of assassination methods. Killing in shadow. Although Soren's clergy was not murder, his mastery of assassination was getting stronger and stronger. With Soren's order, there was a brief disturbance in the distance, but it soon subsided. In the palace, Princess Royal cast a puzzled look at Soren, but after Soren nodded slightly, she looked away. Someone was trying to destroy Princess Anna's coronation ceremony. They didn't dare to do anything when Princess Royal was crowned as a god because the consequences were too terrible. But during Princess Anna's coronation ceremony, Soren's rogues killed at least 5 waves of people who tried to cause chaos and panic during the process. Among them, there were even believers of Lady of the Night, but now their bodies were lying in the cold trench. There was a loud cheer in the square. The people of Arendelle were celebrating their queen, and the whole city was shrouded in a sea of joy. This was something that Mordor could not have because Princess Anna was a kind ruler, and Soren was not. Kindness was sometimes regarded as weakness. So all this required Soren to secretly deal with some people who had ideas. The whole ceremony needed to be completed within a day, so when Princess Anna walked around Arendelle, she immediately returned to the palace. There was still one important part of her coronation ceremony that was not completed. The mighty crowd gathered in front of the palace. And Princess Anna, who looked extremely noble and beautiful, came to the balcony at the top of the palace. She waved to tens of thousands of people and there was a loud cheer below. Then the cheers gradually subsided, and a golden light rose into the sky, and then turned into the figure of Princess Royal. Soren watched all this silently. After the incarnation of Princess Royal appeared, his figure also turned into a golden giant and floated in the clouds. The pressure of the gods enveloped Arendelle. Countless mortals had uncontrollable awe in their hearts, and all the noble lords in the entire Frost Kingdom humbly lowered their heads at this moment. The final ceremony was completed by Princess Royal, and Soren was just a bystander. The 2 gods turned into golden phantoms and stood in front of the palace of Arendelle, while Princess Anna looked at them with a scepter in her hand. With a strange melody coming from the temple, a golden crown that symbolized the supreme royal power of Arendelle appeared in the palm of Princess Royal. The golden giant of Soren stood in the clouds and nodded with a smile. Then Princess Anna lowered her head slightly, and Princess Royal held the golden crown in both hands and slowly put it on her head. Today, Princess Anna was officially crowned as the Queen of Arendelle. As the gods completed the final coronation ceremony for Princess Anna in the clouds, the cheers also resounded throughout Arendelle. Chapter 995. It was a gray wasteland. It was as if some terrible power had taken away all the vitality here. All the plants had withered and even the soil was covered in a rotten smell. It was obvious that there had just been a battle here. There were many corpses of necromancers nearby, and there were also some people wearing strange robes. They had the emblem of a golden scale supported by arm bones on their chests. These people were the priests who served the king of the dead, Clemvox. They had just experienced a great battle, but they were still loyal to one of them. It was a young warrior with a handsome face and calm eyes. He held a heavy sword in his hand and wore a special armor. In front of them was a group of people who wanted to retreat. The leader was a figure in a gray robe. His pale fingers held a staff, and his body was covered in a strong smell of corruption. Vishalan. The young man approached step by step and said slowly, "You can't escape. The god of Lich, Vishalan." Soren had followed traces of this god before, but he couldn't find it. The fall of the god of mages was related to him. At that time, Soren finally tracked down the god of prophecy, Savras, and was led to the territory of the ancient red dragon. At this moment, the god of Lich, Vishalan, was surrounded by his fanatics. Most of them were necromancers and there were 2 powerful liches. The god of Lich's priesthood was necromancer, evil liches and immortality. He was one of the most hated enemies of the god of death because he and his followers often disturbed the rest of the dead. Vishalan was a skeleton. This was a cunning god. Since he was a mortal, he had been wandering among the gods to seek benefits and avoid punishment. He used the power of the goddess of magic to escape the wrath of the Lord of Storms, and secretly colluded with the Lady of Night to work for her. At the same time, he secretly tried to please the Lord of Storms again. At this moment, there were very few followers around him, far fewer than the priests in front of him. However, his expression was calm, and the soul fire in his eyes jumped slightly. He said slowly, "Naive Clemvox, do you think you can kill me like this? You've already fallen into our trap." Clemvox calmly listened to the other party's words, then slowly took a step forward and said, "I know. If there were no traps, how could a weak god like you dare to appear in front of me? Let me guess who's plotting against me? Naruto." All the gods knew that Clemvox, the king of the dead, had always wanted to take back the power of the death god system, and the god of Lich was the one who stole it. The god of Lich had avoided Clemvox for hundreds of years. Now that he dared to appear in front of Clemvox, he must have something to rely on. Visharan chuckled. "Since you know it's a trap, you still dare to come. I didn't expect you to be so arrogant." As his voice fell, Yizichin's voice fell. A strange figure appeared near the wilderness. He was wearing a broken black cloak, and his upper body was a pale skeleton. He held a huge death scythe in his hand, and a terrible pressure shrouded the nearby space. Even if he did not speak, everyone recognized his existence, because this aura of hatred towards life could only be found on one god, and that was the god of death, Hell. Naruto. Clemvox, the king of the dead, had a serious expression and said in a deep voice, "This is not the Grey Eagle world. Do you really want to get involved in the struggle between the gods of this world?" There was not only one material plane. Although Naruto had faith in this world, his core faith was in a material kingdom called Grey Eagle. The world he finally chose to descend to was here, and it was obvious that he had a plan long ago. There were many material planes in the multiverse, and there were many gods scattered across the material planes. Their faith was scattered in many places. Among these gods there was a special one, the Queen of Spiders. In almost all the worlds with drows, there would be the faith of the Queen of Spiders. Her few believers were spread across most of the material planes. Unfortunately, her faith was limited by her race. The strength of her faith in a plane was completely determined by the size of the drow's race. "You don't deserve to rule death." Naruto's voice was full of decay, as if he wanted to end everything. He said hoarsely, "Your weak doctrine is simply a blasphemy to death." Clemvox's doctrine was very gentle. He ruled the field of eternal sleep, and the church insisted on letting the dead rest in peace. He maintained a hostile relationship with most of the necromancers and liches of the evil camp. Clemvox had always been against resurrecting the dead. He believed that the dead should follow their original trajectory and should not be awakened to wander in the world. To some extent, most of the kings of the dead were hostile to him. Although Naruto's figure appeared, Clemvox's expression was still without the slightest fear. Because he was the king of the dead, a god with great divine power. Naruto was a mid-level divine power. Visharan was a weak divine power. Even if these two gods worked together, they could not be his opponents. This was why Clemvox dared to come even though he knew there was a trap. He did not want to give up the opportunity to end the god of Lich. As long as he killed the god of Lich, his enemies would be reduced a lot, and he would also take back some of the power of death. The scythe of death cut through the void. With the surging divine power, the heavy sword in Clemvox's palm was shrouded in dark power and directly blocked the opponent's attack. Some translucent shadows holding the scythe of death appeared. These were his servants of death. Since he knew it was a trap, of course he would not come alone. He had gathered most of his power and was ready to destroy two opponents of the death god system in one fell swoop. With just one confrontation, Naruto was forced to retreat. He said in a hoarse voice, "Worthy of being the king of the dead. Such divine power is indeed not something we can match alone. However, you have to face more than just the two of us." Hearing Naruto's words, Clemvox could not help but frown. Things seemed to be a little beyond his expectations. He thought that the god of Lich was only colluding with Naruto, but at the moment when they just fought, some rotten and depraved evil breath also appeared in the wilderness. Not knowing when, the whole wilderness was full of all kinds of powerful undead. The undead, Orvo. A terrible lich with a staff appeared on the battlefield. He looked at Clemvox with cold eyes and did not hide his disgust and hatred for him. Zazastan. The leader of the Red Robe Wizards, the evil lich who once ruled the Tori region. Behind him were many wizards in red robes. The undead king, Orcus. With the evil breath from the bottomless abyss, the chaotic force field of the demons spread. Orcus' huge and fat figure appeared, looking at Clemvox with crazy eyes. One by one, powerful undead appeared. These undead were at least high-grade legends, and there were even many powerful demigod liches. They were all undead kings who occupied the lower planes. From the spiritual world to the underworld, from the gray wilderness to the bottomless abyss, evil and terrible undead creatures were everywhere in every corner of the lower planes. These people were the enemies of Clemvox. From the very beginning, his doctrine had violated the wishes of these undead kings. If there was no outbreak of the Avatar crisis, none of these undead kings would be able to defeat Clemvox. But now, with the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, Clemvox was weakened a lot even though he was a powerful god. This made it possible for these undead kings in front of him to fight with him. Hundreds of liches appeared in front of him. These liches came from more than 10 different planes and half-planes. The terrible breath of the winter ghosts also appeared. For any undead, the king of the dead was an enemy worthy of fear. And the divine power and priesthood of the king of the dead were also what they most desired. Naruto's conspiracy was to take advantage of the hostility of these people to Clemvox. For thousands of years, Clemvox's church and doctrine had offended countless powerful undead. If it were not for the influence of Jurgil, he would not be able to hold the position of the king of the dead. Clemvox's expression finally became dignified. If there was no Avatar crisis, he would not have the slightest fear in the face of so many enemies in the form of a true god. But now he was only in the form of a saint. Even if he was the Lord God of Death, he might not be able to fight against so many enemies. But at this moment he had no way out. Naruto had sealed all the space and all he could do was to fight with all his strength. October was coming. Soren stayed in Arendelle for 7 days. When he returned to Mordor it was almost October. Gloria welcomed his return and at the same time, brought back the good news from the fallen witches. But before Soren could be happy, he couldn't help but look up at the sky in shock. In the realm invisible to mortals, the star representing the king of the dead, Clemvox, was dim. As if some kind of restriction had been lifted, the death aura in the entire material plane suddenly became rich. With the slight fluctuations of the elemental tide, a breath full of decay, depravity, and death gradually spread. Clemvox was in trouble. Although he had not fallen yet, his situation seemed to be more serious than the disappearance of the goddess of magic last time. Because the slumber realm, that shrouded the material plane and controlled by the king of the dead, Clemvox, was gradually declining and fading. Since Clemvox became a god, the slumber realm had shrouded the material plane, so the possibility of the resurrection of the undead in the material plane was far lower than in other worlds. Now the slumber realm was gradually dissipating. Chapter 996. What happened just now? Gloria came to Soren's side and held Soren's hand nervously. She murmured, "I felt something just now. But it wasn't clear." Although she had the power of prophecy, she wasn't a real god after all. Mortals didn't feel anything when the realm of eternal rest dissipated, but legendary masters would have a weak feeling because the energy of the whole material plane had changed. They would feel a cold and evil breath approaching. Only real gods could perceive the changes in the whole world. As the main god of death, Clemvox's realm of eternal rest was like a magic net that covered the whole world. This kind of power made it so that ordinary dead people couldn't resurrect on their own. They had to use necromancy spells to transform into undead. Now that the long sleep domain was gradually dissipating, along with the dense death aura, even without any spells, dead creatures could be directly transformed into undead. The realm of eternal rest is dissipating. Many great gods had their own realms that covered the material plane, just like the climate of the Amazon rainforest. To a large extent, it was because of the influence of the Storm Lord's realm. Soren closed his eyes and felt the changes in the material plane. He murmured, "Something happened to the king of the dead, Clemvox. The realm of eternal rest that covered the material plane is dissipating." This was a fate that Soren couldn't change. From the beginning to the end, he didn't know where Clemvox was. He was a great god, and unless he deliberately wanted to meet with Soren, it was difficult for Soren to track him down. Everything still happened. In the end, Clemvox still had a battle with the kings of the dead. Although he didn't know where Soren was, he was sure that the battle must be very fierce. The king of the dead's current state should be very bad. If even the realm of eternal rest had lost its effect, then Clemvox should be very seriously injured now. At the same time, as a mid-level god and a god that was close to becoming a great god, Soren also felt a rotten and evil power seeping into the material plane when the realm of eternal rest disappeared. This was the power of Naruto. Although Naruto's faith had spread to the desert, for most of the old gods, Naruto was still a god from another world, an outsider. His faith originated from a country called Grey Eagle. Naruto had spread his faith in the material plane for about a few hundred years, but in the world of Grey Eagle he was already a very powerful god. There were many such gods from another world, including the entire orc god system, which had spread to the material plane during the Battle of the Orcs Gate. Gloria's expression was solemn as she slowly asked, "Will the undead calamity become even more severe because of this?" Soren nodded and said, "Yes. Yes, it will become very serious." The realm of eternal rest was a power that suppressed death, which greatly increased the difficulty of resurrecting the dead. The dissipation of the realm of eternal rest meant that the dead would automatically turn into the undead. Perhaps in a few days, those places that once had a war and a large number of refugees would quickly become a paradise for the undead. In the blink of an eye, a day had passed. As if to prove Soren's words, some strange changes were beginning to happen near the Agate River in the south, where the war between the orcs and the half-elves had broken out. This was a black and fertile land. In order to fight for this land, the half-elves and the orcs had broken out continuously. At this moment, under the pitch-black night sky, on this battlefield where tens of thousands of people had died, a pale palm bone suddenly stretched out from the ground. Then the white bone lifted the soil and a half-orc who looked very rotten crawled out. Even after death, his body was still tall, and he held a rusty sword in his hand. In his eyes there was a weak soul fire. All of this seemed to be the beginning. The whole land began to churn and one by one the undead crawled out from the ground. There were orcs, humans, half-elves, and the undead that had died on this land were resurrected one by one. However, at this moment they didn't do anything. Because on the other side of the battlefield, a very strong undead aura broke out. This was the graveyard of the orcs. Accompanied by the evil aura, a half-orc shaman that was almost rotten crawled out from the ground. He held a white bone staff in one hand and a skull in the other. At this moment he was looking at the other undead with the soul fire in his eyes. Dong dong dong. A strange vibration sound was heard. In front of the orc graveyard, a team of necromancers in grey robes were casting spells, and next to them was a legendary lich. They seemed to be summoning something. Boom. The graveyard in front of them suddenly exploded, and then a burly half-orc walked out of the graveyard. His body didn't rot much, but it was covered with various livor mortis. This meant that he was very powerful when he was alive, and he had tempered his body to a rather amazing degree. This was the Fire Blade Sword Saint of the half-orc clan. He didn't die in the battle with the half-elves, but in the subsequent demon invasion in order to protect the clan, he died together with a secondary demon lord from the bottomless abyss. He used to be the right-hand man of Eugene, the divine ascender. But now he was resurrected as an undead, and his sword was covered with dark flames. This was the withering fire from the high-grade undead, and it was also the most vicious fire of negative energy in the lower plane. It could use the vitality of any living creature as fuel. With the resurrection of the Fire Blade Sword Saint, the surrounding necromancers also retreated and bowed slightly to show their respect. This was a high-grade undead with a creature level of more than 25. His death was because of the curse of the secondary demon lord, so he couldn't enter the Holy Kingdom and was forced to wander in the endless river Styx. Clemvox's realm of eternal sleep dissipated, which not only meant that the restrictions of the material plane were lifted. At the same time, it meant that other undead kings had the ability to reach out and touch the spiritual world, the underworld, and other areas of the river Styx in the lower plane. Without eternal sleep, there was no rest. They could use their evil power to summon the souls of the dead. The same scene happened in Amber City. In the beginning, when Soren left, thousands of houses in the city were burned to ashes, and many people were burned alive in the fire. At this moment in the dark night, a strange white fog spread. There weren't enough bones here, but the remaining souls and resentment led to the birth of ghosts. One after another, pale phantoms floated in the ruins, constantly emitting strange and horrifying laughter. Bottomless Abyss, Soren's Holy Kingdom. After such a long time of development, the entire Holy Kingdom had changed a lot. The size of the reincarnation pool had doubled, but the number of heroic spirits was 10% less than before because many of them had fallen in the war against the Holy Kingdom of Fear. Although new heroic spirits were constantly born, it still couldn't make up for the gap in the beginning. The dead ugly monkey became an oracle from another world. He was currently the highest authority in the Holy Kingdom and was responsible for helping Soren manage the whole kingdom. Of course, he was only responsible for the part of fighting and guiding souls. The specific construction of the Holy Kingdom was still the responsibility of the original Saint Cardinal. At this moment, a golden beam of light suddenly appeared in the sky above the giant god's temple, and then the ugly monkey's figure quickly returned to the temple and knelt in front of Soren's statue. His expression was solemn. About a few minutes later he walked out of the temple and announced to the other heroic spirits, "There are abnormalities in the underworld and the river Styx. Klemvox, the god of death, and his servants from another world can no longer complete the task of guiding souls. Our Lord has given an oracle. From now on, the souls of believers will be guided by us personally. The authority of the gods was part of the operation of the world. Just like the fall of the goddess of magic would cause the collapse of the magic net and affect the entire material plane, Klemvox, the king of the dead, directly caused the souls of the believers of the gods to be unguided. The gods and the god of death had a contract. That was, the souls of most of the believers. Except for those who were particularly devout and important, who would be personally guided by the oracles from another world, the rest of the souls would go to the underworld and be collected by the servants of death. Finally, the oracles of the gods would be responsible for guiding them to the interior of the Holy Kingdom. Most of the souls that were not guided by the oracles from another world would enter the river Styx, and a small number would wander into the bottomless abyss, the Bator Inferno, the Grey Wilderness, and other areas. The ugly monkey had begun to fulfill his duties. He had guided 3 batches of souls so far, about 300 people in total. They were all believers who died in the battle when the elemental chaos broke out in the sphere of influence of Motor City, and some wanderers who believed in Soren and died in battle in other places. These souls all went directly to the underworld at first. Then, as the oracles from another world, the ugly monkey had the ability to temporarily leave the Holy Kingdom. He was responsible for completing the contract and assisting Soren to take the souls from the servants of death. But now it was impossible. Klemvox, the king of the dead, was missing, and those servants of death could no longer complete the task. Although the souls would enter the underworld, they had lost the protection of death. This meant that the devils, demons, and demons would be ready to take action. When Klemvox was still alive, there were bold devils who stole souls from the underworld. Now that the undead kings had joined forces to seriously injure Klemvox, causing his whereabouts to be unknown, many devils and demons could not wait to reach their hands into the river Styx. The figures of the devils were looming in the disaster of the undead. They were creatures whose interests were paramount. After the first plunder of the material plane, these cunning devils quickly targeted the underworld. In this case, the believers of the gods could only rely on themselves for protection. As the oracles from another world of Soren, from now on, the ugly monkey needed to personally lead the demon hunters to guide the souls of the believers. Otherwise they would be stolen by the devils. Chapter 997. Blood dyed the earth red. Eugene dragged his heavy steps forward slowly. Behind him was a tall and burly half-orc with dark red skin. This was the current leader of the Fireblade clan, the 7th-generation Fireblade Swordmaster, and the right-hand man of Eugene, the Ascendant. Around Eugene were piles of white bones and many half-orc bodies. The power of the gods suppressed the evil, and in front of them was a broken body. It was the awakened Fireblade Swordmaster, the powerful existence who once killed the lesser demon lord alone. In this battle, the half-orcs suffered heavy losses. In order to eliminate these resurrected undead, Eugene personally participated in the battle. Nearly 3,000 of the half-orc elite troops died in the battle, which was a very heavy blow to the clan. But Eugene had no choice. He could not allow these undead to spread. Otherwise, the survival of the entire half-orc group would be seriously threatened. Cremate the bodies of these warriors. Eugene's expression was extremely tired. Even after becoming a god, he still maintained his old face. He did not want to deliberately change anything because in the belief of the half-orcs, he was an elder like a father or an ancestor. He slowly said, "Let the shamans prepare the soul summoning ceremony. The souls of these warriors must be sent to the ancestral land to rest." Klemvox, the king of the dead, had an accident, and the souls of all races in the entire material plane were not safe. Eugene looked up in the direction of Autumnfall, where he could see a faint fire. He could imagine what kind of predicament Autumnfall would encounter after losing the realm of eternal sleep. The city was in dire straits. The ghouls in the dark finally showed their fangs. With the arrival of the undead disaster, Autumnfall could become history at any time. The same scene happened in Amber City. A large number of ghosts made many ordinary people flee in panic, but the outbreak of the Avatar crisis made them have nowhere to go. The City of Wealth also broke out in the undead riots, but fortunately the divine power of the Lady of Wealth had recovered a lot, and the riots subsided overnight. Motor City. The dark night fell and a sharp alarm suddenly sounded. Soren's figure appeared at the top of the tower, and beside him stood Gloria. "My lord." A black shadow appeared behind Soren and knelt down on one knee. "There are undead in the north and south of the island of Motor. Some resurrected skeletal creatures have appeared in the west. The temple's guards have already set off." Soren nodded, then looked at the city wall. He did not intend to take part in this battle. The city of Mordor already had enough strength, and the army was enough to quell this level of chaos. Squads of soldiers rushed out of the barracks. At the location of the great shrine, the priests were also gathered under Milan's arrangement. The island of Motor itself had experienced many battles. This time, the people who were resurrected were the aborigines who had been killed by Soren. As for the other skeletal creatures, they were dangerous monsters that had been killed. Most of the undead were relatively easy to deal with. The only troublesome one was the resurrected Quetzalcoatlus. Or rather, an inferior bone dragon. The city of Motor was originally the habitat of the Quetzalcoatlus. In order to prevent the Quetzalcoatlus from hurting the civilians, Soren killed most of the Quetzalcoatlus that could not be tamed. Now some of these Quetzalcoatlus had been resurrected. They had become undead creatures. Although they had lost the ability to fly, they were still a strong threat. About 5,000 troops quickly mobilized towards the place where the undead appeared. The priests followed behind the army and cast spells. The whole process of the battle was very fast. Under the leadership of the giants, the army of Motor City took less than 3 hours to kill all the undead. At the same time, because Soren's divine power was very abundant, the army of Motor City only lost a dozen people under the treatment of the priests. This kind of loss was already very small compared to other places. Because in these 2 days, whether it was Port Tylon, Raging Sand Island, Snake Island, or other places, there were a lot of casualties. In the wilderness, the mighty undead army was gathering. They seemed to be summoned by some terrible power and gathered towards the south. However, what surprised Soren was that the first target of these undead army was his old opponent, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. The undead army was approaching the Principality of Rossard. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was in a very bad mood. It could even be said that she even wondered if she was cursed by the goddess of misfortune. From the very beginning, after encountering Soren and entering into a hostile relationship, all her plans became very unsuccessful. She even died in the hands of Soren. Although because of the life concealment spell, she was resurrected with the help of a spell-cloned body. But because of this, her strength was greatly reduced, falling from near the advanced legendary level to the legendary level. Although she later recovered a lot with the help of the Queen of Yuma, her days were even more difficult. Because Soren's power was getting stronger and stronger, the city of Motor became the most powerful force in the sea. During that time, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife was on tenterhooks all day long. Fortunately, Soren had too many things to do, and he had no time to deal with the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. But this did not mean the end of her misfortune. She did not know when the news of her collusion with the devil leaked out, and she offended many good gods. Even the Church of the God of Light condemned her as an evil existence. Then the rebellion broke out. The whole rebellion consumed most of the Duke of Red Dragon's experience, and even until now she had not been able to completely quell the rebellion. Devils were cunning. Although they gave the Duke of Red Dragon's wife power, they also asked for more in return. Even the Queen of Yuma, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife, was very close to her, and she was very clear that the other party was ultimately coveting her soul. She was eager to get her soul and transform it into a lustful demon. The cunning devils only contributed a little, but they were never lenient when it came to taking benefits. The Principality of Rossard was originally a rich kingdom in the south, but now it was severely depopulated. The continuous wars had reduced the population of the Principality of Rossard by more than 30%. Now, when the Duke of Red Dragon's wife learned that a large number of undead were gathering and preparing to attack the Principality of Rossard, she was in a bad mood. Obviously, the undead were preparing to turn the Principality of Rossard into a kingdom of the undead. Too many people had died in the war, and it was easy for them to become nutrients for the undead. If the undead army broke through the Principality of Rossard's defenses, the whole kingdom would soon become an undead paradise. Inside the castle, The Duke of Red Dragon's wife sat on the throne. Her appearance was still beautiful, but her expression was unusually tired. In front of her was a distorted shadow, and it was obviously not a human. "Can you send troops to assist me in repelling the undead?" The Duke of Red Dragon's wife's expression had a hint of anger, and she said in a low voice, "During this period of time, the devils have plundered a lot of souls. If the Principality of Rossard is conquered by the undead, you won't get anything in the future." A voice that sounded like both a man and a woman came from the distorted shadow, and it said slowly, "Don't worry. After all, the material plane is the territory of the gods. Even the archdevils don't dare to provoke them. The undead army won't break through the kingdom so quickly. You just have to wait patiently." The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was even angrier when she heard this. She said seriously, "Wait? How long do we have to wait? 3 cities and more than 20 towns in the south have been destroyed. More than 10,000 soldiers under my command have died. On the contrary, the number of undead has not decreased at all. Now there are even more of them. What can we get by waiting? Do you have to wait for the undead army to surround the capital before you are willing to take action?" The distorted shadow paused for a moment and said, "I will send the news to the Duke as soon as possible. Please wait patiently, my lady." After that, it disappeared. Bang! The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was so angry that she directly smashed the porcelain next to her. Her full breasts rose and fell rapidly, and it took a long time for her to calm down. She muttered, "Damn devils! Cunning devils! Since you are not willing to take action, then don't blame me for finding a way out." After calming down, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife began to think about who could save the Principality of Rossard at this time. Looking at the entire material plane, there were not many who had the ability to do this. She first thought of the elves, but the elves would not help her. These hypocritical fellows could not wait to kill her. Then she thought of the Church of the God of Light. But she had already colluded with the devils. The Church of the God of Light simply could not tolerate her, and she could not accept the Church of the God of Light. But, in addition to these two forces, there were not many who had the ability to help Rossard out of the predicament. Arendelle was far away in the Frost Kingdom, and she had no intersection with the Princess Royal. There was only one person who was so close to the Principality of Rossard and had the ability to help them out of this crisis. That was the city of Mordor. As if thinking of a terrible existence, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife could not help but tremble. But then she could not help biting her bright red lips, hesitating and struggling as if she was thinking about the possibility. She murmured, "There are no eternal enemies, only eternal interests. He is an evil existence. As long as there are enough benefits, it is not impossible for him to help me. But how much do I have to pay for this?" At the border of the Principality of Rossard, many refugees had died, and the undead army had exceeded 1 million. If this continued, the scale would grow larger and larger. Only the city of Mordor had the ability to resolve this crisis. But the Duke of Red Dragon's wife did not know how she should persuade the legendary Sorin, especially when the two sides maintained a hostile relationship and had fought before. She did not have many chips in her hands, and there were even fewer that could be exchanged. But if the Principality of Rossard was destroyed, not only would she lose all her power, she would no longer have any value. Even if she could escape the revenge of her enemies, it would be difficult to escape the control of the devils. The Queen of Yuma had been coveting her soul for a long time. Chapter 998. The connection between Mordor City and Arendelle became closer and closer. Especially after Princess Royal officially became a god, many people knew that His Excellency Sorin had stayed in Arendelle's palace for a whole week. As for what he had done, it was self-evident. Arendelle had just held 2 ceremonies, and no matter what happened, they must be postponed. Princess Anna had just taken charge of the country, and there were still many things to do, and it was during the outbreak of the Avatar crisis. After half a month, Mordor City had recovered a lot from the last war. Because of the resources of the bottomless abyss, the golem factory had been producing continuously. Sorin was now crazily producing soldiers. However, compared to the expensive steel golems and diamond golems, the most produced in Mordor City were clay golems and stone golems. Hundreds of these 2 types of golems were produced every day. The witches under Gloria's command had increased to more than 300 people. Almost everywhere except the northern tower, many witches had chosen to join Gloria's command. Especially after she mastered the divine profession of prophecy, Many witches who specialized in divination had become her disciples. The Eye of the North didn't say much about this because she knew very well that it was impossible for the Northern Tower to survive the later stage of the Avatar crisis alone. Time passed quietly. Just as the undead catastrophe was getting more and more intense, Soren also received news that more than 1,000,000 undead army had gathered near the Principality of Rossard. Then, something unexpected happened. The goddess of magic had appeared. Although she only showed her traces occasionally, all the news indicated that this was true. The goddess of magic actually showed her traces in the god of knowledge, although it was only for a short half a day, and then she disappeared again. This was undoubtedly an exciting piece of news. This meant that the goddess of magic had recovered well, and it was estimated that it would not be long before the divine network could be repaired. However, things soon took another turn. Because shortly after the goddess of magic appeared, another goddess also showed her traces. She was the goddess of death and magic. She was an otherworldly deity from another world. She didn't have much faith in this world, and her main faith seemed to come from Naruto's original world. She only appeared and disappeared suddenly, and it seemed that she had clashed with the Lich God. The situation suddenly became complicated and confusing. Even Soren could not predict what would happen next, but the chaos seemed to be getting more and more intense. Not long after the two goddesses appeared, a more respectable god also performed a miracle. That was Lady Misfortune. It was as if Lady Misfortune couldn't bear to be left out because of the appearance of Lady Luck. She appeared in a place that no one had expected, which was the already destroyed Amber City. After performing a miracle, she disappeared. The situation was becoming more and more unpredictable. Soren had already changed the course of history, so he was unable to predict the future. Therefore, he could only train his Nigong and accumulate his strength to deal with the changes. It was now October. When the third group of envoys from the Eastern Kingdom arrived, an absolutely unexpected letter was sent to him. Even Soren was surprised by it. This letter was from his enemy, the wife of the Duke of Red Dragon, the ruler of the Principality of Rossard. This was a letter that was sealed with a secret technique. When it was sent to Soren, it was not opened. He opened the letter with some doubts, and after quickly reading it, he said playfully, "Interesting. She wants to ask me for help. I don't know if she's dreaming or not. Or is she desperate?" The content of the letter was very simple. The Duke of Red Dragon actually wanted to ask Soren to help her deal with the undead army. She also asked for a reward in the letter. She was willing to secretly cede a large piece of land in the Principality of Rossard. Soren touched his chin and murmured, "So, she has been abandoned by the demons?" It's not surprising. The demons have always put their interests first. The outbreak of the undead disaster is beyond their control. It's impossible to use the demon army to protect the Principality of Rossard. But why should I help her? She actually has the audacity to beg me. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was Soren's enemy. The reason why he hadn't done anything until now was that he had more concerns. He didn't want the gods to think that he had the ambition to occupy the continent. But this didn't mean that Soren would be willing to help the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Moreover, it was meaningless to occupy the land during the Avatar crisis, and it was difficult to defend it. But when Soren was about to refuse, he hesitated. As an evil god, he certainly wanted to seek greater benefits for himself. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was a very valuable chess piece. Now that she asked him for help, Soren immediately began to think about what he could get from her. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was close to the south coast and had a large population and army. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife had a lot of bargaining chips, and there were also a lot of valuable things for Soren. Soren thought for a moment and said, "Since she asked me for help, then let her come to Mordor City and talk to me in person. If she doesn't even dare to come to Mordor City, then this person has no value to me. If she dares to come to Mordor City, then it's not impossible to consider. After all, her value is not low." A legendary dragon bloodline warlock, the ruler of the Principality of Rossard, a warlock family that had been passed down for thousands of years. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife had a lot of things that Soren could use, and her soul was also very attractive to Soren. If such a high-grade legendary spellcaster was integrated into the Kingdom of God, it would be very useful. Let's do that. Soren immediately began to prepare a letter for the other party to come in person. As long as she dared to come, Soren had a way to deal with her. The bottomless abyss. The third layer, the Forgotten Land. Compared to the undead disaster in the material plane, a war had recently broken out in the bottomless abyss. First of all, the demon lords in the lower planes were in trouble. The appearance of the ancient Zerg gave them a headache, and the appearance of some ancient evil creatures made them even more uneasy. Because they assisted Soren in attacking the Kingdom of Fear, the demon army in the Galumba arena suddenly shrank by 2/3. But just when the other demon lords thought they had an opportunity to attack the other side, reality gave them a hard slap in the face. Sauron, the Baelor leader, had a large number of high-grade demons under his command, and these high-grade demons were given some strange rings. In addition to his own ring, a total of 9 powerful demons were given rings. These rings gave them the terrible ability to mobilize divine power, making them very powerful all of a sudden. The war had only broken out for a few days, and any demons who tried to challenge Sauron's rule were crushed. At this time, Sauron had become the most powerful demon lord in the Forgotten Land. However, there was still an enemy in front of him, and that was the King of Gnolls from the Bottomless Abyss. Although there were some accidents that made Jianghu stop the attack, the huge Gnoll army still existed. Only by defeating them could Sauron completely control this layer of the Bottomless Abyss. Under the dark night sky, on a land that had just experienced a massacre, the space suddenly distorted strangely. The aura of death gathered, and there was some kind of very dark energy faintly. Then a crack broke open in the distorted space, and then a slender man with frightening black eyes and dead white skin jumped out of it. His face was unusually pale. His expression was cold, crazy, and cruel. It could be seen at a glance that he was a very narrow-minded, self-centered, and extremely extreme person. This was a very intuitive feeling. From the moment his existence appeared, the nearby space was shrouded in evil energy. Ah! Ah! A strange suppressed low laughter sounded, and then it turned into a crazy and violent laughter. The cold man murmured, "I'm finally out. Plumvox. Midnight. Tir. Shanda. I'm finally out. Now. All of you have to pay for what you've done." The crazy laughter suddenly stopped. Then the cold man looked around in surprise and murmured, "Where's my divine power? Why is my power so weak? Damn it. What happened to this world? Why has my power weakened to such an extent?" The god of murder, Sirik. The former Prince of Lies finally broke the seal because of the Avatar crisis, but he suffered a serious blow as soon as he came to the material plane. He had consumed a lot of power to escape the seal of the chaotic space and time, and under the Avatar crisis he was directly suppressed into the form of a saint. He soon found that he had become very weak, and the speed of recovery of his power was very slow. There was almost no divine power gathered. This meant that his church was about to dissipate. Damn it. Sirik gritted his teeth and cursed his former enemy, murmuring, "How long have I been sealed?" He looked up at the sky. The stars under the night sky were all dim. He seemed to think of something. He had seen such a night sky before and murmured, "The Avatar crisis? Has a new Avatar crisis broken out? Great." Suddenly, his expression was full of surprise and he murmured, "God is really helping me." His rise couldn't be separated from the last Avatar crisis. After breaking the seal and discovering that the Avatar crisis had broken out again, Sirik's heart was suddenly full of joy. Because he was once the biggest winner of the Avatar crisis. If he didn't seek his own death, he might be the god of gods. Sirik firmly believed that he was favored by fate. The outbreak of the Avatar crisis was the favor of fate. Because he had just broken the seal, only the Avatar crisis could help him take revenge on those powerful enemies. This time he would not repeat the same mistake. Sirik firmly believed that he would be the final winner. And this time he would really become the god of gods. P.S. The cute girl with a big dick that you have been shouting about, the beautiful administrator in women's clothing, has been updated on the public WeChat account. She is one of the book friends. I don't need to say who she is. I'm just an old driver who silently gives out benefits. You can see it by following the public WeChat account, Buddha. Chapter 999. That night, Soren felt something. It was a wonderful feeling, a resonance brought about by the divinity of death and slaughter. At the same time, Soren also felt a sense of crisis. This meant that someone who had the same power as him had arrived. Sirik. Soren stood at the top of the arcane tower. The cold night wind blew his long hair. He hadn't taken care of his hair for a long time. Gods didn't need it, but because he was in the form of a saint, his body still maintained the metabolism of a human. In the form of a real god, his body had turned into an existence of energy. Sirik had been sealed for too long and had lost his church, so his arrival was different from other gods. His movements were quieter, and his power was weaker than other gods in the beginning. However, slaughter itself was a source of power that could easily increase. As long as Sirik was given a chance, he would be able to recover quickly. There were only a few sources left for the inheritance of the power of the three gods of death. The first source was Sirik. He used to be the biggest winner, but unfortunately he was too late. The second source was Clemvox. He took over part of Sirik's power and existed for a long time because of Jurgel's help. But now, Jurgel might not be very satisfied with him, because the outbreak of the undead disaster meant that there was a huge conflict between his doctrine and the other undead lords. Jurgel's position was very delicate. No one could predict what an existence like him cared about. The third source was the Dread Lord. He created the Son of Fear, who was now completely replaced by Vivian and Lillian. The last source was Soren's blood. He was the nameless hero who killed the god of slaughter, Baal, but in the end gave up inheriting the divinity and lived the rest of his life as a mortal. This person was the most terrible existence. Countless legendary creatures had died in his hands. But it was hard to imagine that he would give up becoming a god at the last moment and live the rest of his life as a mortal. That was how Sirik took away the massacre priesthood. Otherwise, there would have been another death priesthood in the battle between the three death gods. This existence's bloodline was already very thin. Soren should be the only successor, and this inheritance was mostly due to the convergence of other powers. In the beginning, Soren's power was very weak, but as he killed and died, the divinity of slaughter in his body became more and more condensed. This was a terrifying power that originated from plundering. According to history, Sirik's first target should be a god related to death and slaughter. Soren pondered silently, recalling everything that had happened in the past. He muttered, "But history has already been changed by me. I'm Sirik's #1 enemy now, but he won't find me so soon, so he doesn't have many targets to choose from." Although Sirik was very weak, he still had the foundation of a mid-level god. If it wasn't for the fact that he had ruined himself, this evil guy would definitely be the child of destiny. But since he read the Sirik scripture himself, this guy's luck took a turn for the worse. He was originally the strongest god, but creating the Sirik scripture consumed a lot of power. This was an evil book that even the main gods would be affected by, but he was stupid enough to read it himself. In the end, he directly fell into endless self-worship. Although he was lucky to recover later, madness had already seeped into Sirik's soul. Since then his luck had disappeared. First he lost the battle with the god of tyranny, Ban. Then he was tricked by Clemvox and Midnight. Finally he was directly sealed for thousands of years, and even the church dissipated. Right. Soren seemed to have thought of something and muttered, "Goddess of magic. Midnight. King of the dead. Clemvox." These two are definitely Sirik's most hated enemies. I'm afraid Sirik wants to kill them even in his dreams. Now, although the goddess of magic is missing, the news of her serious injury will definitely be known. Clemvox is also in trouble now. With Sirik's hatred for them, he will definitely find a way to deal with these two. So, as long as there is a trace, maybe I can find a way to find something. The one Sirik hated most was Clemvox, who was one of his fated opponents. Then there was the goddess of magic, Midnight, who was also an existence he wanted to take revenge on. If I were Sirik, what should I do now? Soren was used to thinking in reverse. At this time, he assumed that he was Sirik and said to himself, "If I were Sirik, I would be very weak after just breaking the seal and escaping. The church is basically destroyed. In this case, my strength is at most above the high-level legendary level. Then the first thing I should do now is to hide and find a way to restore my strength. So, what should I do to restore my strength at this time? Blood sacrifice. This is the most direct, fastest and effective way to restore myself. It can quickly make myself a demigod and restore the form of a saint. However, if I want to recover my current strength, it's impossible for me to use an ordinary blood sacrifice. They are at least high-level legendary creatures or creatures with divinity. If it is such a creature, then the target range is narrowed a lot. Sirik was an evil god. A very orthodox kind of evil god. So, Sirik was different from Soren. He accepted blood sacrifices and enjoyed them. To restore his strength, it must be a high-level legendary creature, preferably a divine creature. If the range was narrowed to this scale, then Sirik's targets would be reduced a lot. How can I find him? Soren fell into deep thought and said to himself, "At present, the most high-level legendary creatures in the material plane are liches, undead, devils, and demons. Almost all high-level legends among the mortals occupy important positions. Such existences are too difficult to kill and too obvious. It is easy to expose myself. There were many high-level legends in the material plane, but their status was very special. For example, the Eye of the North was a high-grade legendary witch, but her status was the ruler of the Northern Tower. The other high-grade legendaries were similar. They either held important positions in the Church of the Gods, were strong people who ruled a country, or were powerful people who held power within their own race. Elves, dwarves, orcs, and humans. Soren continued to deduce and murmured, "These four races can be excluded. The possibility of being exposed is too high. In the current environment, the most suitable ones are undead, demons, and devils. It is too difficult to find traces of devils. The devils have retreated to the abyss. Then the undead are the most likely. Cyric has the clergy of murder, conspiracy, lies, deception, and illusion. Murder is the evolution of death. He is most likely to kill the undead." His thoughts were clear. Soren continued to deduce, "With Cyric's ability in clergy, I am afraid that the first step of the blood sacrifice has been successful. If he wants to kill a lich, no one should be able to stop him. Then he should have at least recovered the strength of a demigod." It was difficult for mortals to stop Cyric. Now there were many undead in the material plane. There were many demigod liches and divine undead. Cyric only needed to find one and kill it to recover a lot of power. There was nothing Soren could do to stop this. And because of the clergy of illusion, lies, and deception, Cyric was very good at deception and hiding. The possibility of finding him was very low. If he recovers the strength of a demigod. Soren continued to ponder and said to himself, "Then the next step is to recover the strength of a true god. This requires more blood sacrifices, more divinity, and at the same time, a church. Cyric's church has disappeared. Then when he has a certain amount of strength, he will definitely rebuild the church. Then there will be fewer choices for him. Either he kills a god and disguises himself as him to receive faith, or he can rebuild the church. This is very difficult. It is impossible without hundreds of years. Even my church was completed by the church of the half-elf god. The Queen of Spiders once killed a god and pretended to be him to receive faith. The truth was not revealed until she had complete control. Cyric is very likely to do this. Divine power would not be obtained for no reason. Cyric also needed to recover step by step. This is the case. Which god will Cyric choose as his target? First of all, this god cannot be too powerful. Second, this god must have some connection with him. It is best to have something to do with one of his clergy. The target that the Queen of Spiders killed was the god of the Underdark. Then Cyric's choice of target will be narrowed down a lot. With his current strength, even if he uses tricks, he can only kill a weak god or a mid-level god at most. So, if the range is narrowed down, he may only choose these targets. Soren waved his hand, and the picture of the gods appeared in front of him. At present, all the gods of the material plane were in his knowledge. Excluding some who must not be provoked, the range of choices was very small. At the same time, in a dark basement, the body of a dead lich was in the center of the altar. Cyric's eyes were filled with joy. The light of divinity appeared on his body. He said with a ferocious expression, "What a stupid guy. Do you think you can fight against gods with a phylactery? What a naive fool." The power of the soul was plundered, and the flame of divinity was integrated into the body. Cyric contentedly absorbed the energy and returned to his demigod form. It was easier for a god to fight a lich than he had imagined, especially one that was related to death. He could destroy the lich's phylactery as soon as he killed it. The flame of the soul of the lich turned into the power of Cyric. He quickly recovered his strength and thought about the next target. But for some reason he suddenly felt a little uneasy at this moment. Chapter 1000. Under the Dark Night. A special visitor came to the city of Mordor. When she came down from a warship, the guards around her couldn't help but look at her. There was no other reason, the other party was too eye-catching. Even though she was wearing a black cloak on the outside and a loose black robe on the inside, it couldn't hide her impressive figure. She was far more voluptuous and tall than the average woman. Even the tall guards seemed a little shorter when facing her. This was a woman with extraordinary charm even though her face couldn't be seen clearly. She wore black silk gloves on her white palms, and her exposed skin was as white and tender as a baby. Beside her were the upper-level officials of Mordor City. At this moment, they were carefully welcoming her to the mansion of Mordor City as if they were facing a great enemy. "Don't look." The patrol captain, Kent, patted the guy who was drooling next to him. Even if he couldn't see her face, the guards under him seemed to be possessed. He couldn't help but say coldly, "That's a distinguished guest going to the inner city. It's not something you guys can imagine. And if I'm not mistaken, that woman is a warlock at first glance. She's dangerous." Kent was a veteran. He guessed the woman's profession with his full intuition. This kind of extraordinary charm could only be possessed by a warlock. Even if the other party's appearance couldn't be seen clearly, her aura was enough to affect others. The tall woman moved forward with the officials. Her figure was so tall, probably close to 185 meters, so she was particularly eye-catching when she walked. After wearing black high-rise riding boots, she was half a head taller than most men. At this moment, her expression seemed casual, but careful people could still detect a trace of tension. She seemed to be unintentionally observing everything in the port of Mordor, but there was a trace of shock inadvertently appearing. Even if she had already known everything from the mouth of the spy, she was still very surprised after seeing the changes in Mordor City with her own eyes. The changes here were too fast, so fast that it was beyond her imagination. The flat road was paved with cement. No matter if it was raining or blowing, it had no effect. It was enough for 10 carriages to pass together. This was a road that even the king's city didn't have. From the port area to the inner city, there were rows of crystal street lamps. These expensive luxuries were casually built on both sides of the road, and it seemed like they had been there for some time. Even when night fell, the port was not deserted. The residents of Mordor City had long been used to drinking or finding other ways to pass the time, such as the popular baths. The residents of Mordor City liked it very much. The cheap price made them like cleanliness, and they despised and were proud of the dirty appearance of the outsiders. The pride of Mordor City had seeped into the bones of the residents. They were proud of their identity as citizens of Mordor City. "What's that?" The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was surprised by the things she saw along the way. But when she saw a civilian open a metal pipe and clear water immediately flowed out, she couldn't help but ask in confusion. A man who looked like an official carefully replied, "This is a water pipe. The unified water supply system of Mordor is only laid here at present. Residents pay about 10 copper dirhams a month to meet the water supply needs for a month." Even under the cover of the night, Mordor City looked so clean and tidy. There were not many residents who used tap water. Most of them were from good families. 10 copper dirhams was within their range of affordability, mainly because it was very convenient. As for other residents, they used well water, which needed to be specially brought over. It was obvious that they were a little envious and wanted to use this convenient water source. The pursuit of new things was also a symbol of identity. Most of the people who couldn't afford tap water in Mordor City were civilians who had just obtained their identity. It seemed that the Duke of Red Dragon's wife was very curious about these. The official next to him nodded and began to introduce in a proud tone, "These are street lamps used for illumination at night, and also used for festivals and celebrations. Over there is a high bridge and water shelf. These are drainage ditches directly connected to the sewer. There is no sewer as large as Mordor City in the entire material plane. It's just that recently, because the place is too big, it seems that some kobolds and goblins have moved in. This is the residential area. All the houses are built with bricks and tiles. They are far stronger than other cities and they are not afraid of fire. Over there is the staff area, which is the second batch of buildings. They are all 2-story buildings. The library there contains hundreds of thousands of books. Over there is the museum, which contains many precious cultural relics. Next to it is the theater, where there will be 2 performances every Sunday. The largest building in the south is the college, which has more than 5,000 students at present. Over there is the green belt. In the future, these roads will also be planted with trees. Recently, some droll people have strongly requested that the scale of greening be expanded so that nature and the city can be balanced. The official next to him introduced one after another, his expression full of pride. He had been to many places, including those big cities in the capital, but no city was as neat, civilized, advanced, and beautiful as Mordor City. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife looked at all this silently. She lived in the main city of the Principality of Rossard, but compared to everything she saw in Mordor City, she suddenly found that the city under her rule was like a garbage dump full of feces and dirt. They were not on the same level at all. The faint fragrance of flowers came. The greening of Mordor city was divided into 3 parts. One part was supervised by the city hall. They planted the plants and flowers that humans were used to. The other part was led by the half-elves. They liked all kinds of flowers. The last part was the largest part, which was the responsibility of the Church of Agriculture and the Droll. They liked to plant trees and other plants, hoping to balance the city and nature. During this time they were studying a new direction for the future, a city full of green but advanced and beautiful enough. Right. Recently, these Droll people had a very bad evaluation in Mordor city. As soon as they came over, they took over the work of environmental protection and greening, which made many residents who usually did not care about these things realize the stubbornness of the Droll. The officials of the city hall also hated them because these Drolls stubbornly argued with them on the allocation of land. They thought that the scale of greening should be increased. Damn it. Mordor city's greening was already dozens of times more than other cities. Didn't they know that the island of Mordor was so big, and there were still many places to divide the land? Civilization. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife looked at all this silently and suddenly said 2 words softly. She finally knew the huge gap between her and Soren. The power of Mordor city had grown to an unimaginable level. They even had extra financial resources and manpower to do these things that were almost unimportant. It was something that only needed to be considered a little and only considered in peaceful times. In short, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife looked all the way and felt a kind of rich aura, as if they were blatantly telling others. Grandpa is rich. Grandpa's technology tree can already be used by the people. Chapter 1001. In the end, Soren chose to meet the Duke of Red Dragon's wife at the city lord's mansion. On the way, whether intentionally or not, the officials of the city hall took the Duke of Red Dragon's wife to visit the city of Mordor, but most of them were civilian and commercial aspects. As for the military force, there was nothing to show off. Because in the whole material plane, who didn't know that the army of Mordor was famous for its fighting ability? Soren sat in a chair and looked down at his old opponent in front of him. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife, his former enemy, even almost killed him, but now she was just an existence that he could kill with a wave of his hand. Time had changed everything. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was obviously a little shocked after seeing Soren, but she restrained herself very well. Because as a high-grade legendary profession, she felt the pressure of the gods on Soren. The more powerful the existence, the easier it was to feel the horror of this pressure. It was a gap that mortals could not cross. It's an honor to meet you, the great Lord of Shadows. The tall Duke of Red Dragon's wife humbly lowered her head, then took off the veil on her face and slowly said, "Everything in Mordor is an eye-opener for me." A charming face appeared. The Red Duchess had always been very confident in her beauty. She was not even afraid of the Bator Inferno, but now Soren's calm eyes made her a little uneasy. Because in Soren's eyes, it seemed that he didn't care about her at all. Soren played with the ring in his hand and slowly said, "I didn't expect you to ask me for help. Why not the devil? Or some evil god who secretly has a connection with you? Have you been abandoned by them?" Soren's words were so aggressive, but the Duke of Red Dragon's wife was just stunned for a moment, then calmly said, "I came here because only Soren can give me the help I want. I can also provide Sir Soren with what you need." It seemed that she had already thought of how to deal with the situation before her. Soren smiled playfully. "What I need? What can you give me? Land? Population? Well, I can get them myself. As long as I want, Mordor city can take over the entire Principality of Rossard in 7 days." Soren's words sounded very arrogant, but his tone was very calm, as if everything was insignificant. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife couldn't help but take a deep breath. She rationally felt that this was impossible, but looking at Soren's attitude, it didn't seem like he was bragging, so she said in a serious voice, "I believe that the force of Mordor is strong enough. However, if you want to take over the Principality of Rossard, you have to pay a sufficient price. This is a turbulent time. No matter who it is, they should conserve their strength. It's best to improve your strength without changing too much. My coming here already represents the greatest sincerity. If Sir Soren really doesn't want to cooperate, then you can let me leave now or kill me here." What the hell? This little bitch's temper was really stubborn. Soren originally just wanted to show his power to the other party, but he didn't expect the Duke of Red Dragon's wife to be so stubborn. He suddenly smiled and said slowly, "You even have the awareness of death? It seems that your current situation is really bad. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was silent. She originally thought that this stubborn words could give her more bargaining chips, but she didn't expect Soren to point out the essence of her situation. Her situation was already very bad, and she was even prepared to die in her heart. What a terrifying evil god. He actually easily saw through her heart with just a few words. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was filled with unease and fear, but this time she had no way out. Instead, she stepped forward and met Soren's gaze. The Principality of Rossard is indeed in grave danger. The undead army has already gathered in the millions, and with the current strength of the Principality of Rossard, it's impossible to stop them. But why, Sir Soren? If the Principality of Rossard is broken through by the undead army, and all the living are slaughtered, how strong will the undead become? With so many sacrifices, how many terrifying creatures will the evil liches summon from the underworld? In that case, I won't be able to escape death. But what about the Windspear Hills that Sir Soren put so much effort into? I heard that they have taken in a large number of refugees, and there are also many believers who serve you. If the undead army destroys the Principality of Rossard, how terrifying will their strength be? With the current strength of the Windspear Hills, do you think they can stop the undead? This cooperation is not only for myself, but also to solve some problems for Sir Sauron. Soren laughed and stood up, clapping his hands. I didn't expect the legendary Madam of the Duke of Red Dragon to be so eloquent. As a true god, Soren did not deliberately change his appearance, so when he stood up, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife immediately noticed that she was slightly taller than Soren. She quickly lowered her head so that she looked a little shorter than Soren. It was an inconspicuous detail, but it showed that this woman knew her limits. Soren did not care about this small difference. If he wanted to, he could turn into a giant at any time, but there was no need for that. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife lowered her head to show her position. She came here to ask for cooperation. She was very clear about her identity, and she was also expressing her respect for Soren. I can provide you with the help you need. Soren looked down at the Duke of Red Dragon's wife, who bowed her head and said slowly, but I'm not interested in the reward you can provide. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife bit her lips and said in a low voice, Then what do you want? Soren looked at the Duke of Red Dragon's wife in front of him and walked around her twice. He had to admit that she was a rare beauty, and the quality of her soul was very pure. No wonder the Queen of Yuma was so interested in her. Who was this woman? Her soul should be enough to cultivate an excellent, otherworld god's messenger, right? Soren's gaze made the Duke of Red Dragon's wife feel like she was naked. His gaze even seemed to penetrate her soul, making her unable to hide anything. You don't seem to be a devout believer. Soren smiled and lifted the Duke of Red Dragon's wife's chin. He said slowly, You believe in Lady of Night, right? As a dragon disciple, you actually chose Lady of Night as your believer. Interesting. I'm not interested in anything related to the Principality of Rossard. But I'm very interested in you and the Warlock family behind you. And my appetite is also very big. If you want my help, you and the Warlock family behind you must swear loyalty to me. You can think about it slowly. To me, the threat you just mentioned doesn't exist. I have a way to settle the Windspear Hill. Chapter 1002. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was speechless. Soren was right. The city of Mordor did have a way to settle the civilians in the Windspear Hills. The only difference was how much it would cost. But she had no choice. The undead army had gathered to a terrifying scale. According to the current progress, it would take at most 3 to 5 days for the millions of undead to launch a full-scale attack. The liches and necromancers were resurrecting more undead, and they used these undead to form even more terrifying skeletal creatures. In this way, even the city walls could not stop the undead army from advancing. That's impossible. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife struggled for a while before she said, My family will not surrender to you. At most, I will make some concessions in this regard. The sorcerer family had its own inheritance. Because she had a close relationship with the devil, she had no choice but to ask for help from Soren, who used to be her enemy. But the sorcerer family did not have a deep relationship with the devil. Whether it was the devil or the evil gods, these people did not want to get too involved because it would be difficult to escape in the end. In the heyday of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife, the family fully supported her. But since she lost to Soren for the first time, there had been a disagreement within the family. Some of the sorcerer bloodline thought that her behavior was wrong, and some even directly left the family and moved to other places. At present, the family's internal conflicts were not small. There were still about 40% members who were willing to be loyal to the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife did not have the confidence to control these people. After all, the Dragon Disciple was a group that could easily grow up. There were one or two other legendary sorcerers in the family who could threaten her. Soren stood up and said calmly, "Nothing is impossible. Actually, I'm more or less aware of your current situation. Do you mind if I make a hypothesis? Currently, you can only mobilize about 80,000 soldiers in the Principality of Rossard, which is not enough to stop the undead army. Currently, there are no forces in the Principality of Rossard that can help you survive this crisis, and the glorious city is being held back by the winter ghosts. By the time the paladins react, this place will have become a kingdom of death. Under such circumstances, what will your fate be?" Soren smiled playfully and looked straight into the eyes of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. "If I'm not mistaken, you didn't obtain your power entirely by yourself." He circled around the Duke of Red Dragon's wife and sniffed her fair neck. He then whispered in a devilish voice, "You are very talented. But dragon warlocks are a profession that takes a lot of time to grow. You're only about 30 years old, aren't you? No matter how talented you are, you're only at the legendary level. In other words, you use some kind of secret technique to increase your strength. And it's a very evil secret technique. You have the aura of a devil on you and the energy in your body is somewhat mixed. Your bloodline is mixed with many forces. If I'm not mistaken, you use some kind of evil secret sacrificial technique to extract the bloodline of some of your kin, right? This seems to be a method that only archdevils can use. If that's the case, there should be an archdevil behind you. Let me guess who it is. Currently, all the archdevils in power are rather honest. It seems that only one of them is eager to prove herself. If I'm not wrong, the one who signed a contract with you and secretly helped you is the Lust Demon Queen, right? But it seems that she's ready to give up on you? Of course. I shouldn't say that she's given up, but rather that she's waiting for the ripe fruit. From the perspective of the gods, if you're transformed into a lustful demon, you'll be a very good material. But are you really willing to go to the Bator Inferno and become a lustful demon? Are you willing to have your memories wiped and be controlled by the devils? With every word Soren said, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife's face turned paler. In the end, she was completely pale. Soren's words seemed to have some kind of magic, and she felt as if she could see the future. The devils seem cunning, but in fact they're short-sighted. They like the benefits in front of them and at most in the near future. Soren stood in front of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife and said in a deep voice, "I don't think you can escape. There aren't many people who can help you. Even if other gods are willing to help you, they'll have to consider the consequences of offending Queen of Yuma." The Duke of Red Dragon's wife trembled. After a while, she looked up at Soren and said, "What do you want from me, sir?" Soren finally showed a satisfied smile and said slowly, "There aren't many things about you that are worth my attention, and you're just one of them. I can help you get through this crisis, and I can even help you escape the wrath of Queen of Yuma. But as a price you have to be loyal to me. I can promise you that no matter what happens in the end, you'll be able to obtain a status no lower than that of a Holy Spirit in my kingdom. I won't tamper with your memories, control your soul, and let you reincarnate in your original form in my kingdom." The Duke of Red Dragon's wife bit her lips. To be honest, Soren's treatment wasn't very good, but she didn't have many choices. Whether it was going to the Bator Inferno to become a devil, or becoming a Holy Spirit in a god's kingdom, she didn't want to do either. She wanted to live. And to survive, she had to be able to get through this crisis. The Queen of Yuma didn't give up on her. She was waiting for her to reach a dead end, and then she would harvest the fruits of her labor. This was something the Duke of Red Dragon's wife couldn't accept. "I agree." The Duke of Red Dragon's wife struggled for a long time, and finally knelt down in front of Soren. She humbly lowered her head and said, "Great ruler of shadows, I'm willing to offer my loyalty to you." No matter what, as long as she was still alive, there was still hope. If she could get through this crisis, she might have a way to escape from the control of the evil god and the Queen of Yuma. No matter how small the chance was, she had to try. Soren looked at her playfully. The once high and mighty Duke of Red Dragon's wife, the ruler of the Principality of Rossard, and the enemy who almost killed him, was now kneeling in front of him. He had to admit that this feeling was great. "P.S. I'll be taking the train tomorrow. I'll be back the day after tomorrow. Chapter 1003. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife stayed in Soren's room for a long time before she came out. When the Duke of Red Dragon's wife came out of the room, her clothes were obviously a little messy, and her face was a little flushed. On one hand, it was because there was a small dispute between the two sides on the issue of cooperation, and on the other hand, it had something to do with the excitement brought by Soren's complete suppression of his former opponent. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife was a very smart woman. She knew how to use her strengths and advantages, and she knew that she herself was a very useful bargaining chip that could be exchanged for more benefits when necessary. Therefore, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife served Soren well in the following time, letting him fully understand the difference between a dragon disciple and an ordinary person. This difference was not only in terms of temperature, but also in some other physiological structures. Evil gods would never be held hostage by morality. When the Duke of Red Dragon's wife left, Soren's expression immediately became cold. He gently waved his hand, and a black shadow appeared outside the room. Soren said in a deep voice, "Send someone to secretly watch her, and pay attention to the Principality of Rossard's movements." The women in this world would not be loyal to someone just because of one pleasure. What he had just enjoyed was just a trivial seasoning for Soren. He could not stay in the mortal world for much longer. Once the Avatar crisis was over, he would have to return to the kingdom of God, and the difficulty of returning would be greatly increased. Soren could clearly feel that the Duke of Red Dragon's wife had not completely surrendered to him. She was just fighting for her own interests. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife did not want to enter the fallen Bator Inferno, but she also did not want to enter Soren's kingdom of God. Dragon Disciple had a very long life. With the strength of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife, if she stayed in the material plane, she could at least live for thousands of years without aging. She was only using herself as a bargaining chip to gain more benefits from Soren. Soren, on the other hand, did not mind eating the candy. He was determined to get the soul of a high-level legendary profession, and he would not be soft-hearted just because of a simple pleasure. Whether it was the goddess of wealth, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife, or even the goddess of magic who had been temporarily removed, Soren would never compromise. If it was necessary, he would not show any mercy. "My lord." A gentle female voice sounded outside the door, and a graceful half-elf wanderer appeared. She knelt down on one knee and said, "The things you want are ready." Soren nodded. "Got it." After saying that, he put on a long robe and appeared in the temple. Soren was familiarizing himself with the power of the gods. After being a god for so long, he had also mastered a new ability that he could bestow upon his followers. Gift of Slaughter. This was a special ability that originated from the power of the slaughter domain. It was a kind of divine grace, and it was related to Soren's titles such as Slayer, Deathwalker, and so on. This ability could only be bestowed upon Soren's devout followers, who could access Soren's slaughter and death domain and mobilize a trace of slaughter power. However, this power was not bestowed upon them, but was added to their weapons. Crafty Approach. Slaughter. Death. Slayer. Deathwalker. Soren pressed his palm on the temple, and then a majestic divine power gradually spread and transmitted to the hearts of all the devout followers who believed in and served Soren. There were many kinds of divine powers, and the most common ones were divine grace and domain access. Soren's new ability was related to Crafty Approach. With the power of Crafty Approach, he could bestow upon his devout followers a new kind of special power, and let them receive a little bit of divine power from Soren when they visited the domain. This ability could be called a heritage weapon. Along with the ripples of divine power, many devout followers had knowledge of a new ability in their minds. Excited prayers came from outside the temple, and at the same time, all the devout followers of Soren could not help but praise his greatness. Soren's new ability was a gift from God. This ability could bestow upon his devout followers the power of heritage weapon. Or it could be said that through sacrifice, their weapons could have the power of soul devour from the slaughter domain. In the process of visiting Soren's slaughter and death domains, the devout followers could visit the special domain of heritage weapon. In this case, they could choose a weapon that they were best at as their heritage weapon, and this weapon would gradually increase with their level. A level 5 rogue could spend about 200 Kindler's materials to upgrade their weapon through rituals and sacrifices in Soren's temple. This heritage weapon would be infused with a little bit of divine power, and thus become a +1 magic weapon. This weapon contained a trace of soul devour. Any enemy who died under this weapon would have a trace of their soul power imprisoned, and at the same time the weapon's ability would be strengthened. When the weapon was strengthened to a certain extent, it could continue to be upgraded in the temple by spending 500 kindlers materials, and eventually become a +5 rare grade weapon. This weapon was a bit similar to the legendary Black Demon Sword. Soren's mastery of this ability was entirely due to the power of the evil god, and at the same time, it was also related to his comprehensive abilities. Under normal circumstances, after becoming a true god, the gods themselves would experience a lot less battles. Most of the gods would turn the direction of their research to power. These powers could be used to cultivate special professions like Dark Guardian, and could also be used to bestow other domains and divine blessings. Strictly speaking, this was the first time Soren had mastered divine blessings. This weapon was an evolution of the power of slaughter, and it was very evil to other gods. Soren didn't care about these things. The gift of slaughter was his own unique ability, and the weapons that were created through sacrifice could only be used by his devout followers. In other words, he was born with faction restriction. This was why this ability was called a heritage weapon. After a weapon with Soul Devour was created, other than its original owner, only Soren's fanatics could use it. As for other professions, even if they obtained this weapon, they would be cursed when they used it. The inspiration for the gift of slaughter came from the One Ring in the bottomless abyss. When Soren created the One Ring, he injected the power of slaughter and death into it. This power helped him secretly control the demon lords who gave him the One Ring. The gift of slaughter was another weakened version. Its biggest function was to strengthen the combat ability of his followers, and it gave them the possibility of borrowing a trace of the power of slaughter from Soren. Upgrading a heritage weapon from +1 to +5 required about 80,000 kindlers materials, and some powerful high-grade enemies had to be killed. This kind of divine blessings wouldn't be very effective in a short period of time. However, as time passed, Soren's church would gradually produce some +5 rare weapons, and this kind of accumulation would become quite terrifying after a few decades. In the temple, Soren spread out the power of the gift of slaughter, and almost immediately devout fanatics began to sacrifice. Most of them were high-grade rogues. During the process of sacrifice, a trace of divine power was fed back to Soren. Although this power was very little, it brought a trace of vibration to the divinity of slaughter. Golden light rippled in the temple. After Soren gave the first divine blessings, he also began to create the first special profession. Every powerful god would create a few unique professions. For example, the Mystery Knight of the Goddess of Magic, the Storm Lord of the Lord of Storms, the Ascetic of the God of Suffering, and so on. When the gods used their clergy and divine power to give power to their followers in a special way, a new profession was born. And these new professions often gained additional power from the clergy and domain of the gods. Soren didn't plan to cultivate a Dark Guardian. Although the Dark Guardian was the standard of an evil god, Soren didn't think that this profession was suitable for his church. There were many special professions such as Magic Archer, Shadow Dancer, Pale Lord, Red Dragon Warlock, Shapeshifter, Pugilist, Weapon Master, Mystery Knight, and so on. The special profession that Soren was going to create was the Arcane Assassin. As a god who controlled the power of Rogue, Shadow, Slaughter, Arcane, and Death, Soren could choose to give the Arcane Assassin new special abilities. This ability was equivalent to an additional divine blessings, allowing the assassin to mobilize more shadow energy and master some simple arcane skills. At the same time, Soren also limited the advancement requirements of the Arcane Assassin. Just like the Shadow Lord, that he wanted to advance, the ability and advancement requirements of this legendary profession were actually controlled by the God of Shadow. This was the ability that was given to them by their clergy. The Arcane Assassin must be advanced by a rogue. In other words, a level 5 rogue, a level 5 assassin, and a level 1 arcane assassin. Spellcasters could also advance, but they must at least have the corresponding rogue ability and assassin level. When they successfully advanced into an arcane assassin, they would receive additional special abilities from Soren. A level 1 arcane assassin would be given the ability to summon shadows. A level 2 arcane assassin would be given the ability to travel through shadows, as well as additional evasion abilities. A level 3 arcane assassin would be given the special ability of Stealth Master. Soren determined the final ability of the arcane assassin according to the abilities and clergy that he mastered. This profession was a high-grade advanced profession. To advance into an arcane assassin, one had to be at least profession level 11. The abilities that came with this profession were related to Soren's clergy. They were given amazing reflexes, extraordinary speed, top-notch stealth skills, as well as decent deceit and concealment abilities. This profession's specialties were added to spying, assassination, stealth, and so on. A successfully advanced arcane assassin would first visit the lurker domain, followed by the shadow domain, then the slaughter and arcane domains. Soren gave this profession the ability to cast spells. This included but was not limited to shadow jump, shadow travel, dark vision, shadow summon, shadow transformation, and so on. However, unlike traditional spellcasters who understood and mastered these skills themselves, the arcane assassin was given this ability by Soren. They only used this power and tool, but they did not understand this power and tool. Therefore, every ritual to advance into an arcane assassin required Soren's personal approval. This meant that the arcane assassin was born with the help of his clergy. Although there was no strict requirement for belief, most of those who could advance into a profession were definitely followers of Soren. P.S. It was a 22-hour train ride and it was terrible. But on the way, I finished thinking about the special profession that Soren gave me. I'll act cute and ask for votes next month. Chapter 1004. The light of divine power surrounded the great shrine. At the same time, all the shrines in the material plane that served Soren had a faint golden light. This was the power of faith that Soren was extracting from the entire church. Even for a god, it was not easy to create a new advanced profession. The ability that Soren wanted to give to the new profession determined how much divine power he needed to consume. Moreover, these advanced professions were often unable to make ends meet. If Soren cultivated too many of them, he might need to consume more divine power. Therefore, Soren needed to set a limit. He had to raise the threshold of the advanced arcane assassin to ensure that every advanced arcane assassin was an excellent rogue. The arcane assassin's dexterity cannot be too low. The required dexterity should be around 22 points. If you want to obtain the ability of divine arts and arcane, then your perception should not be too low. Accompanied by the golden light of divine power, Soren calculated the minimum perception requirement for the arcane assassin. If you want to advance to the arcane assassin, your dexterity must not be lower than 22 points, and your perception must not be lower than 14 points. This was the minimum requirement for a priest. As for other attributes, there were no mandatory requirements for the arcane assassin. However, the higher your perception, the more shadow divine arts you could use. At the same time, Soren also provided more shadow damage for the arcane assassin. When using Shadow Strike, the bonus from perception could add additional shadow damage. Next, Soren began to set the equipment restrictions for the arcane assassin. In order to reduce the consumption of divine power, the arcane assassin must only wear leather armor. Soren could not give them the ability of a rogue swordsman. Next, the preferred weapon was a dagger. Those who used a scimitar would need an additional ability. Dual wielding was a must. Almost all the rogues who believed in Soren had the potential to be a battle thief. Dual wielding was an additional ability. Finally, there was the more important part. This was the part where Soren consumed the most divine power. He set the legendary ability of the arcane assassin. Basically, all special advanced classes had the unique power of the legendary level. For example, the Storm Lord could summon lightning, the ascetic could be immune to elemental damage, and the weapon master could choose his own weapon. The arcane assassins that Soren created had to be given the corresponding legendary abilities. Otherwise, they would only be a normal high-tier class. On the other hand, Soren's goal was for the arcane assassin's final form to be an advanced legendary tier character, possessing abilities that would not be inferior to any other legendary tier character class. Rogue level 5, Assassin level 5, Crafty Assassin level 10. The normal template is level 20. Without taking into account the part-time jobs, there should be a unique legendary ability. Soren thought for a while and waved his hand. The light of divinity shrouded the temple, and at the same time he drew power from his divinity of shadow, and murmured, "The power before legendary comes from the divinity of wanderer, which gives extra bonuses to the profession. Then after becoming a legend, I should be able to use the power of the shadow, priesthood. For my first legendary ability, I'll choose the direction of bloodline strengthening. I've decided on you. Transformation into a shadow being." Soren controlled the power of the shadows, so the first legendary ability he gave to the arcane assassin was transformation into a shadow being. This was a very powerful ability. Through rituals and special items, one could turn into a shadow being, retaining the most basic characteristics of a human. They needed to eat and rest, but they did not have any fatal weaknesses. Their body was transformed into a semi-energy state. The biggest advantage of transforming into a shadow being was that they could be resurrected. Not only could they be resurrected through divine spells, but they could also store their life source somewhere in the shadow plane. After their physical body died, their body would automatically draw the materials prepared in advance to complete the resurrection. In other words, they could reconstruct a semi-energy body. This ability had appeared in some of the top shadow assassins before. At the same time, Soren gave the arcane assassin additional shadow abilities after transforming into a shadow being, strengthening their stealth ability, and giving them the special arcane skill to merge themselves into the shadows. For the second legendary ability, I'll choose Shadow Assassin. Soren thought for a while and gave the arcane assassin a high-grade divine spell as an additional reward. This divine spell was a level 8 divine spell. It could use one's own shadow as a medium to summon a shadow assassin with 60% of one's strength. It was similar to Mirror Image and Simulacrum, but the effect was slightly weaker. This was an additional divine spell, and casting it would consume Soren's divine power. Currently, he only planned to give this divine spell to the rogues who believed in him. The arcane assassin transformed from an outsider would definitely not be the same as the arcane assassin transformed from his believers. This ability was considered a gift from God. As for killing and death, I can't give it to them yet. The core of Soren's divine domain was still in the shadow plane. With his strength as an intermediate god, he could only give them 2 additional legendary abilities at most. However, the profession of the arcane assassin was created by him. After Soren's own strength was strengthened, he could still give them additional abilities. Creating a profession could not be done casually. Although Soren could directly give the arcane assassin a level 1 to 9 divine spell, doing so was basically equivalent to creating a chosen. The burden of divine power would be very terrible. Soren could only choose one of the abilities as an additional gift to reduce his own consumption of divine power. Along with the spread of a golden light. The arcane assassin created by Soren was officially formed, and with the glory of the temple, most of the devout believers learned about the arcane assassin. However, if they wanted to advance, they had to go to the Great Temple of Mordor. At present, only the Great Temple of Mordor could complete the transformation ceremony of the arcane assassin. This was too long, and Soren needed to give the shadow blessing. It took almost a day or two. Soren's great temple ushered in the first batch of rogues transformed into the arcane assassin. They were originally advanced assassins because there were not many choices for the rogue profession. There were only 2 legendary professions that they were most likely to advance into. One was the arcane assassin, which was the ability of a part-time mage, but it required high intelligence. The other was the shadow master, which was very scary. The birth of the arcane assassin was tantamount to lowering the threshold of the legendary profession. At the same time, it also greatly improved their ability, allowing these people to mobilize more shadow energy. In just 3 or 4 days, the number of people in Mordor City who had transformed into the arcane assassin had reached 100 or 200, and this number was still increasing. At the same time, good news came from Sigil City. Inside the tower, Soren's figure appeared at the top of the arcane tower. During this time, he was busy dealing with the transformation ceremony of the arcane assassin. At the same time, he observed whether there were any shortcomings and obvious weaknesses of the profession he created. These needed to be determined through actual combat. "You're here." Gloria's figure stood in front of the crystal ball. After Soren appeared, she turned around and smiled. "Look at this. Mother recently found this in Sigil City. It can be sent back in about a day or 2. A huge steel machine appeared in front of Soren's eyes. He walked to the crystal ball and took a look. He wondered, "What is this?" Gloria explained, "This is a magic steel furnace. The demand for steel in the arcane era is very high. This huge demand can't be met by the backward steel forging methods alone. What you see in front of you is a furnace used to forge magic steel ingots. There are bigger things outside. This is a set of small steel forging furnaces from the arcane era. It can meet all the requirements of a small floating city. As long as iron ore is put in to smelt, the initial refining can be completed. The later part can be done by golems. The output is not yet clear, but it will definitely be far more than the current Mordor city. Wasn't this a small automatic steelmaking factory?" Soren looked at the rune lines on the huge steel instrument in front of him. It was densely packed like a circuit board. He couldn't help but sigh at the wisdom of the arcane civilization. It's quite troublesome to transport this thing back, isn't it? Soren said. Gloria nodded and said, first take it apart and then transport it back in batches. Mother has already made contact with the surviving arcanists in Sigil City. Their situation doesn't seem to be very good. These are all exchanged with soul crystals. For arcanists, gold coins were not of much significance. They only cared about those precious resources. By the way, Gloria seemed to think of something. She mysteriously handed a scroll to Soren and said, this is the information collected in Mother's tavern. It comes from an astral explorer who has been wandering for hundreds of years. Astral explorer. These were some legendary creatures wandering in the astral world. They were all very powerful creatures. What is this? Soren took it in confusion, opened it and looked at it. Then his expression was a little surprised. Really? Gloria nodded and said, it should be true. Mother also spent a lot of money to exchange for this information. It recorded the trajectory of a small diamond meteorite. The astral explorer personally boarded this meteorite about 1 kilometer in diameter. The surface of this meteorite has been crystallized. Its interior should have been transformed into a diamond form because of the elemental reaction. The astral explorer left a space waymark on it, but for some reason he couldn't take it away with his own ability, so it was best to sell its location at a high price. Diamond asteroid. In the boundless multiverse, some asteroids would directly transform into diamonds for some reason. Its density and mass would greatly increase. This was one of the most valuable treasures in the astral world. Even the gods could not ignore it. However, a diamond asteroid with a diameter of 1 kilometer, even Soren was not sure if he could bring it back. Chapter 1005. In about 2 days, the Fallen Witch sent back the parts of the steel furnace. The core of the whole huge machine was a rune stone, which was like a central processing system. There was a huge rune engraving operation in it, which was responsible for the normal work of the whole machine. Although the arcane civilization did not have a huge computer, it had advanced artificial intelligence like Thaling. To some extent, the two civilizations had similarities. Soren was not an expert in this area, but Gloria and the Fallen Witch were very familiar with it. Especially Gloria, who had recently begun to study some of the mysteries of the magic network. If she succeeded, she might be able to further master the true meaning of the mage clergy. At the same time, the army of Mordor began to move to the south coast. After all, the number of the undead army was still too large. Soren had to secretly help the Duke of Red Dragon's wife, so he issued a contract against the undead, in the name of the Lord of Mordor, the Lord of Shadows and the true God of Rogues. The contract said that under the threat of the undead, they should temporarily put aside the hatred of the past. Even if there was hatred, it had to wait until the undead were dealt with. On the surface, they temporarily resolved the hostile relationship with the Principality of Rossard. Others could only guess that the Duke of Red Dragon's wife had found a way to ease the relationship with Soren, but they would never think that the Duke of Red Dragon's wife had given up the demons and turned to Soren. The world was so realistic. Although the demons were powerful, their strength was limited in the material plane. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife did not hesitate to betray them in a desperate situation. Soren was not a naive child. The struggle of the gods was full of conspiracy and betrayal. He knew very well that if he did not have enough strength, even the Maiden of Pain would secretly betray him, let alone the Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Soren was now at the peak of his power because he was strong enough and he was still getting stronger. As long as he could ensure the growth of his power, these people would be more loyal than expected. Soren would not personally participate in the battle against the undead. At most, Soren would deal with enemies above Demigod Lich, and with the current situation of Mordor City, he also needed a group of loyal people to die in battle. That's right. Soren needed them to die honorably as warriors. The army of Mordor was huge and there was a steady flow of reinforcements. For Soren, Mordor was about to undergo a military transformation. As it turned out, there were simply too many pirate warriors. Soren needed more disciplined civilian warriors, so it would be best if 10 or 20,000 of these pirate warriors died in battle. This was the magnanimity of the evil god. To Soren, the death of 10 to 20,000 pirates was nothing. Their deaths were not worthless. These people would save millions of civilians and at the same time, wash away a part of their sins. More importantly, Soren's kingdom should also be supplemented with a new batch of heroic spirits. In order to protect the heroic spirits and petitioners of the divine kingdom, the gods would also engage in a more tragic battle in the material plane. Those who died would be received into the divine kingdom to be reincarnated, and the original rebellious habits of the pirates would also change a lot. Soren was already qualified to play chess in the material plane. As a chess player and an evil god, Soren was cold enough and good at calculation. Mordor City needed to change the blood of the army because after the first difficult period, the pirates had begun to show signs of corruption and difficulty to manage. Their habits were very bad. They had followed Soren for the longest time, so many pirates could not be managed. They could only be sent to other sea areas to guard, but there were still many bad things happening. For example, in Raging Sand Island, Shipwreck Bay and other places, pirates who were born without knowledge and were rude and evil often committed some crimes, and some of these crimes would be transferred to Soren. After all, he was an evil god. What Soren needed now was not pirates, but a group of more disciplined navies. The roots of the pirates were there. Even with Soren's cruel suppression and strict legal protection, the pirates themselves were still difficult to restrain. For such a long time, there had been constant battles in Mordor City. The pirates were the main force on the front line. At present, the number of casualties was not small. The ones left were all elites. Some of the potential ones had been included in the officer class. Most of them were literate and quickly adapted to the current life. Most of those who could not integrate into the civilization and still maintain the pirate habits were placed in other islands and sea areas. Soren was now mobilizing these pirates. The number was about 50,000. Soren's plan should be about 50% of the casualties. Of course, before letting them die gloriously, Soren's church had to do something to tell these pirates where they belonged after death. Only in this way could they die for him. Life and death. Today Soren was no longer the Soren of the past. As a true god, he could decide the life and death of nearly 20,000 people with just a thought. Thinking of this, he could not help but murmur, "Is this the world in the eyes of the gods? It's no wonder that mortals are so insignificant to the gods." The mighty fleet began to gather, and at the same time, they transported troops to the vicinity of Port Tylon. These pirate warriors gathered together happily, calculating how many military merits they could get this time. The most valuable thing in Mordor City was military merits, which could be exchanged for too many things. And these people did not know that at least half of them would die in this operation. The priests of Soren's church also began to mobilize on a large scale. Their task was to bless these warriors. There were resurrected necromancers in the undead army. They had to bless the warriors and ensure that their souls could be taken into the kingdom after death. At the same time, in the third layer of the bottomless abyss, a large number of heroic spirits began to gather in Soren's kingdom. Under the leadership of the ugly monkey, a group of divine servants were transformed. They were ready to leave the kingdom at any time. After the heroic spirits died in the material plane, they would be taken into the kingdom. This would be a large number of heroic spirits. The estimated death of the pirate army was more than 20,000 people. In addition to other additional casualties, Soren's kingdom would welcome more than 30,000 petitioners this time, and many of them were qualified to be transformed into heroic spirits. Now, the number of shadow creatures that could be transformed in the kingdom had decreased a lot. Even if he controlled the entire kingdom, it was not enough to make up for the shortage. The petitioners that Soren needed to be killed in the material plane. This was the decision of an evil god. As an evil god, he could not be soft-hearted when dealing with these problems. Chapter 1006. The expansion of the undead became more and more serious. However, Soren also had a lot of things to do. Taking advantage of the buffer time after defeating the Dread Lord, he also aimed at the astral plane. The first target was naturally the Diamond Asteroid. In the boundless astral plane, there were many meteorites that had undergone material transformation like this. Some of them fell to the material plane as meteors. Currently, the largest diamond mine in the southern countries was caused by the fall of a certain meteor. However, it was controlled by the Wizard Alliance, and after hundreds of years of mining, there was not much left. Diamond was a common and rare material that wizards needed. Because it could be cut into diamonds, it was also very valuable among mortals and was loved by many noblewomen. Soren's need for diamond was not for money, but because diamond was consumed in high-end alchemy experiments and the production of legendary golems. Why did Mordor have so few diamond golems now? Was it because there were no legendary soul stones? Whether it was the bottomless abyss or the material plane, Soren could get a lot of high-grade soul stones. The key was diamond. To be honest, the production of diamonds in the material plane was limited, and the value was also very high. Buying them through conventional channels was enough to empty the treasury of Mordor. It was not impossible to synthesize diamonds, but it cost a lot and was very slow. The witches could only make very small diamonds by destroying elements. Then it was imperative to plunder resources from the astral plane. Whether it was the Northern Witches or the Wizard Alliance, they had never stopped exploring the astral plane for a long time, and powerful creatures from other planes also targeted the astral plane as their main target. The astral plane wanderer was a benchmark for high-grade legends. Mordor City. After explaining all the things that needed to be dealt with during this period of time, Soren locked the teleportation mark on the scroll and was ready to go to the asteroid to see the situation. "Do you need me to go with you?" Gloria sat on a wide and soft velvet chair, gently lifted her long hair and said, "Maybe I can help a little." Soren shook his head and said, "No. Mordor City still needs you, and the astral plane wanderer will sell the information. This matter is definitely not that easy." The unknown meant danger. This time, Soren didn't set off with his main body. Instead, he created an avatar that possessed 80% of his strength while he remained in the arcane tower. "Then I'll help you open the portal," Gloria said as she stood up. Soren did not object this time. Since he had to activate it, it was better to conserve his divine power. He had a feeling that there was something dangerous on this small planet. Otherwise, the other party would not have given up so easily. A white light appeared. After Soren's avatar nodded to Gloria next to him, he went straight into the portal. In the boundless astral world ocean. As soon as Soren stepped out of the portal, he saw a white halo surrounding him. This was the area of the astral sand. This silver river was spread all around the astral world. It was a very special substance. The asteroid was now in the astral river. As soon as it reached this place, Soren felt a dangerous aura. A huge creature was swimming not far away. Astral giant whale. A special kind of astral world life. It looked somewhat similar to the whales in the material plane, but its body was up to 1,000 meters long, and the largest may be tens of thousands of meters long. It was a dangerous creature that wandered in the astral world. They were the original inhabitants of the astral world. A strong sense of crisis emerged, and then Soren felt a little pain. Then crazy data appeared, affected by strong radiation. Force test of exemption triggered. Constitution test failed. Tenacity test failed. Under the influence of high-intensity radiation. You received 10 points of radiation damage per second. An invisible energy field enveloped Soren. This was the energy radiation on the asteroid. The destruction of matter brought terrible energy. Even with the ability of his avatar, he could not avoid it and received such high damage. If it were immortal, how serious would it be? Damn it. How can there be such strong radiation on it? Soren put a layer of protection on himself, but the effect was not very good. The invisible radiation had been hurting him. Even with his amazing vitality, he could not hold on for too long. He had to constantly buff himself and heal himself at the same time. He tried to take a step forward, but it was very difficult. He could not help but be surprised. Such a high gravity? It was a terrible gravity. This asteroid had a gravity far beyond that of the material plane, even higher than that of the Earth elemental plane. According to Soren's preliminary estimate, the gravity here was more than 50 times that of the material plane. This meant that it was extremely difficult for ordinary warriors to walk here. Is this going to become a white dwarf? Soren laughed self-deprecatingly. The gravity of a white dwarf was much more terrible than this. A normal white dwarf had a gravity 1 billion times that of the material plane. Basically, it could only be reached in the form of pure energy. Even most elements would be affected, which meant that even atoms and electrons would be affected. Although the structure of the multiverse was different, there were still some similarities. In this world there was something called annihilating matter. It could be found at the edge of the abyss and the distorted nether. It was a very rare material and Soren had a little bit of it. Some of the annihilating matter was only the size of a fingernail, but it weighed more than 10 kilograms. This was caused by elemental collapse. According to the knowledge from his previous life, Soren knew that there were molecules, atoms and electrons inside matter. Things that seemed to have no gaps were actually filled with space inside. When these spaces were compressed, the elements would collapse, and a huge object would be directly compressed to a very small size. Some divine artifacts did not look big, but their weight was amazing. Some things looked small, but they could be tens of thousands of feet long. There was a very strange relationship between these. There is no doubt about it. Soren looked down at the crystallized ground under his feet and muttered, "This asteroid seems to have passed through the distorted nether. Its size has been greatly reduced because of the elemental collapse. It was such a small planet. The gravity was more than 50 times that of a material plane, so its size could be estimated. It was definitely hundreds of times bigger than it was now. Perhaps because of the distorted nether or some other reason, the elements inside the planet had collapsed. The elements were just like the molecules and atoms in his previous life. Their structure had been completely changed. The gravity is not more than 10,000 times. Then the change should be on the molecular level. The atoms inside should also be distorted. But according to the rules of this world, the small things that have been changed should be called elements. There were gaps and rules in the arrangement of substances, but if the smallest thing was directly compressed, its nature would begin to change. Just like Earth in his previous life, if the elemental collapse happened according to the rules of this world, the molecules and atoms would be directly crushed together, and the size of Earth would be directly reduced by hundreds of thousands of times. Supergravity. Super radiation. Soren sensed his surroundings and muttered, "No wonder that astral wanderer gave up on exploring. With such a strong gravity, it was difficult for spellcasters to walk on it." Even Soren felt that it was a little difficult after taking a few steps. He was not yet in his divine form, so he was not completely immune to the effects of gravity. 50 times the gravity was enough to directly kill any ordinary person who reached it. The elements have been crystallized. A golden light appeared on Soren's fingertips. He cut out a structure from the asteroid in front of him. It was a pale white semi-crystallized material. It was only the size of a fist, but it was heavier than steel. He muttered, "The elements on the surface have collapsed so much. Then the elemental inside should have been completely destroyed. The destroyed material seems to have its own gravitational effect. In other words, it is very likely that a large destroyed core has been born inside this asteroid. Once the elemental destruction occurred, the weight of a material of the same volume would be more than 10,000 times the original weight. The unusual radiation and gravity of this asteroid should have been born because of this. How do I transport this thing back?" The surrounding scenery quickly retreated, and the asteroid was still moving according to its original trajectory. It was not difficult for Soren to bring it back, but if he did not find a way to reduce its kinetic energy, it would destroy the entire outer islands. This thing hitting a material plane was much more exciting than an atomic bomb. "Let's see what's inside first." Soren thought for a moment, turned his divine power into a long sword, and directly cut the surface of the asteroid. The surface was very solid and it felt like a steel armor. After cutting about 20 meters of thickness, Soren found traces of adamantine. It was not the scattered adamantine. Instead, it was a huge piece of adamantine that had been completely formed. There was no way to estimate its size, but the smallest one was the size of a fist. Its value was simply immeasurable. Soren's expression was very surprised, and he said to himself, "The elemental collapse really led to the birth of a large number of adamantine. The value of this asteroid is completely immeasurable. If we transport it back, the city of Mordor can mass-produce adamantine golems. But if we want to transport it back safely, we have to use divine power." It was not small. Its weight was amazing. There was only one way for Soren to transport it back, and that was to use divine power to guide it, and it could not be placed in a material plane because the damage it would cause was too terrible. What if I use divine power to reduce the impact, and then set up a circle to buffer it and send it to the shadow plane? Soren fell into deep thought. There was no doubt that this would also bring a lot of disaster to the shadow plane, but it would definitely be much less than the material plane. The most feasible way for him now was to send it to a place near the laboratory in the shadow plane. At most, he spent a few hundred divine power to strengthen the nearby space and material to withstand the impact of the asteroid falling. Soren was the god of shadows. If he used the power of the plane, he should be able to minimize the consequences. You're tuning in to the Han Lee's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.